Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Perfect Gift. Glenn Coleman stood in the doorway of his bedroom, coffee mug in hand, watching his wife Melanie arrange the exotic plant she'd brought home the evening before. The morning sunlight streaming through the windows caught the plant's unusual purple-black leaves, making them shimmer with an almost metallic sheen. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Melanie said, stepping back to admire her purchase. The woman at the botanical garden said it was incredibly rare. Apparently, it only blooms once every few years, and when it does, she paused dramatically. The flowers are supposed to be absolutely stunning. Glenn nodded, though something about the plant unsettled him. Its leaves seemed too perfect, too symmetrical, and there was an odd sweet smell emanating from it that reminded him of rotting fruit masked by perfume. But Melanie looked so pleased with herself, and after the year they'd had, his promotion at the engineering firm, her successful launch of the interior design business, finally getting their twins into the private school they'd wanted, he didn't want to dampen her spirits. "What's it called?" he asked, setting his mug on the dresser and walking over to examine it more closely. "Belladonna Nocturne," Melanie replied, running her fingers gently along one of the leaves. "Isn't that romantic?" The lady said. "It means beautiful lady of the night." Glenn's engineering mind kicked in as he studied the plant structure. The root system seemed unusually robust for a decorative plant, and the soil looked different from typical potting mix, darker, more organic. "Where exactly did you get this?" "I thought you said the botanical garden, but..." "Well, not the main one downtown. There's this specialty place about an hour north. Galloway Botanical Specialties. The owner, Aurora Galloway, she has the most incredible collection of rare plants. She said this one was perfect for our bedroom because it releases oxygen at night instead of carbon dioxide like most plants." "That's unusual," Glenn mused. Most plants he knew have switched to releasing CO2 at night. Did she mention anything about care instructions? Special fertilizer, watering schedule? Melanie laughed, the sound light and musical. "You, in your engineering brain, always needing to understand how everything works." She said it's very low maintenance. Just water it once a week and keep it in indirect sunlight. Glenn's phone buzzed with a text from his business partner at Coleman Burton Engineering. Wesley Burton had been his closest friend since college, and their small but successful firm had been built on their combined expertise. Glenn's structural engineering background and Wesley's environmental engineering specialization, which included a deep knowledge of botany and plant biology. "Wes wants to meet for lunch today," Glenn said, scrolling through the message. "Says he has some concerns about the Morrison project." "That's fine. Emma and Ethan have soccer practice after school anyway, so I'll be late getting home." Melanie glanced at her watch. "Speaking of which, I need to get them ready. Can you help Emma find her cleats? I think they're in the garage." As Glenn headed toward the garage, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the plant. On impulse, he pulled out his phone and snapped a quick photo. Wesley would know if there was anything unusual about it. The morning routine proceeded as normal. Breakfast chaos with the 8-year-old twins, Emma's last-minute panic about a science project, Ethan's refusal to wear anything but his lucky jersey. Glenn dropped them off at Riverside Private Academy, the exclusive school they'd worked so hard to get the kids into. The tuition was astronomical, but the education and connections would set Emma and Ethan up for life. At the office, Glenn tried to focus on the structural calculations for the Morrison high-rise, but his mind kept drifting back to the plant. Something about Melanie's story didn't quite add up. She was usually so detail-oriented about her purchases, especially expensive ones, but she'd been vague about the cost and location. Around 11:30, his phone rang. Wesley's name flashed on the screen. "Glenn, I need to see you right now." "Where are you?" "At the office." "Wes, what?" "I'm coming up. Don't go anywhere." The line went dead. Glenn stared at his phone, confused by his partner's urgent tone. Wesley was typically the more laid-back of the two, the one who kept Glenn grounded when his engineering perfectionism threatened to derail projects. 5 minutes later, Wesley burst through the office door, his usually neat brown hair disheveled, his face pale with panic. "Where did you get this plant?" he demanded, holding up Glenn's phone with the photo displayed. Melanie bought it yesterday. Why? What's wrong? Wesley sank in a chair across from Glenn's desk, his hands shaking. Glenn, this isn't just any exotic plant. If I'm right about what this is... He paused, running a hand through his hair. We need to get your family out of that house. Now. Glenn felt a chill run down his spine. You're scaring me, Wes. What exactly are you talking about? This plant, I've only seen it in research papers, and those were classified. It's called Somnolentia mortis. The common name, when people bother to give it one, is the widow's lure. Widow's lure? That's not what Melanie said it was called, because whoever sold it to her lied. Glenn, this plant doesn't exist in any legitimate botanical garden. It's been banned from cultivation in most countries because it's incredibly dangerous. Wesley leaned forward, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. The plant releases a cocktail of airborne toxins, especially at night. The initial exposure causes euphoria and deep sleep, but continued exposure over several weeks leads to organ failure, starting with the liver and kidneys. Glenn's blood ran cold. Are you saying someone is trying to poison my family? I'm saying someone has placed a biological weapon in your bedroom, designed to kill you slowly and make it look like natural causes. The question is who and why. Glenn stood up abruptly, his chair rolling back and hitting the wall. I need to call Melanie, get her and the kids out of the house. Wait. Wesley grabbed his arm. If we're dealing with someone sophisticated enough to acquire this plant, we need to be smart about this. They might be watching, waiting to see if you discover what it is. If you suddenly evacuate your family, they might escalate to more direct methods. Glenn's mind raced through the possibilities. Who would want to harm his family? His engineering firm had no major enemies, no disgruntled clients who would resort to murder. Melanie's interior design business was successful, but hardly controversial. They lived quietly, paid their taxes, coached Little League on weekends. There's something else, Wesley continued. The plant's care requirements. It needs to be watered with a specific nutrient solution to maintain its toxicity. Whoever gave this to Melanie either provided that solution disguised as regular plant food, or they have a way to access your house regularly to maintain it. The implications hit Glenn like a physical blow. Someone had been planning this for weeks, maybe months. Someone with access to illegal biological materials. Someone who knew their routines well enough to know that Melanie would place a bedroom plant exactly where it would do the most damage. We need to find out where she really got this plant, Glenn said, his voice steady despite the fury building in his chest. This Aurora Galloway, whoever she is, she's either the person trying to kill us or she's working for them. Wesley nodded grimly. I'll start researching the plant source networks, see if I can trace where something like this might have come from. But Glenn, we can't let on that we know. If they realize we're onto them, they might try something more immediate, Glenn finished. He thought of Emma and Ethan, probably sitting in their afternoon classes, unaware that someone wanted them dead. The protective fury that surged through him was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. Don't worry, Wes. Whoever is behind this made one critical mistake. What's that? Glenn's expression hardened, the easygoing family man replaced by something far more dangerous. They picked the wrong family to mess with. I spent 4 years in Army Corps of Engineers before college, and I didn't build a successful business by backing down from problems. They want to play games with my family's lives? I'll show them what a real engineer can do when someone threatens what matters most to him. Wesley had never seen this side of his partner before, but he recognized the cold calculation in Glenn's eyes. What do you want me to do? Keep researching the plant. I'm going to pay a visit to this Galloway Botanical Specialties. But first, I need to figure out how to neutralize the thing in my bedroom without alerting whoever put it there. Actually, Wesley said, pulling out his laptop, I might have an idea about that. If we can't remove it without raising suspicions, maybe we can sabotage it from the inside. Chapter 2. The investigation begins. That evening, Glenn watched from his home office as Melanie moved around the bedroom, completely unaware of the danger lurking 3 feet from where she slept. He'd convinced Wesley to come over for dinner, ostensibly to discuss the Morrison project, but really so his partner could get a closer look at the plant and the surrounding area. The soil composition is definitely altered, Wesley murmured as they stood in the bedroom doorway after Melanie had gone downstairs to help Emma with homework. Look at the drainage system. This isn't a normal potting setup. Someone modified this specifically for optimal toxin release. Glenn examined the base of the pot more carefully. These aren't regular drainage holes. They're positioned to create airflow patterns. Whoever set this up knows exactly what they're doing. There's something else, Wesley said, kneeling beside the plant. See these white crystals mixed in with the soil? That's not fertilizer. It's a chemical accelerant designed to enhance the plant's natural toxin production. So they're not just trying to poison us slowly, they're trying to make sure it works fast. Wesley nodded grimly. Based on the concentration, I'd say you have maybe 2 weeks before serious symptoms start showing. 3 weeks before. He didn't need to finish. Glenn felt his jaw clench. We need to know who we're dealing with. Tonight, after everyone's asleep, I'm going to install some surveillance equipment. If someone's been coming into our house to maintain this thing, I want to know when and how. What about Melanie? Are you going to tell her? Glenn had been wrestling with this question all day. Not yet. She's not good at hiding her emotions, and if whoever's behind this is watching, they'll know something's changed. Besides, I need more information before I can protect her properly. They went downstairs to join the family for dinner, Glenn forcing normalcy into his voice as he asked Emma about her science project and listened to Ethan's detailed recap of soccer practice. But his mind was elsewhere, analyzing every person who'd been in their house recently, every routine that someone could have observed, every enemy he might have made. After dinner, while Melanie supervised the kids' homework and bedtime routines, Glenn excused himself to his home office. He pulled up the property records for Galloway Botanical Specialties, running the address through every database he had access to through his engineering firm's research subscriptions. The results were disturbing. The property had been purchased 6 months ago by Aurora Galloway, but Aurora Galloway had died in a car accident in Oregon 2 years earlier. Whoever was using her identity had done their homework, but not quite well enough to fool a thorough background check. Glenn dug deeper, cross-referencing the property purchase with shell companies, looking for any connection to his own life. What he found made his blood run cold. The property purchase had been financed through a loan from Riverside Financial Group, the same company that held the mortgage on their house and had processed the loan for Emma and Ethan's private school tuition. Someone with access to their financial information had been planning this for months. Glenn's hands moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, pulling up every interaction they'd had with Riverside Financial, every employee they'd dealt with, every piece of personal information they'd provided. The pattern that emerged was subtle but undeniable. 3 different interactions over the past year. The school loan, a refinancing inquiry Melanie had made, and a consultation about a home equity line of credit had all been handled by the same person, Mitchell Walker, Senior Financial Advisor. Glenn pulled up Walker's employee profile and felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Walker had been with Riverside Financial for 8 years, had access to detailed financial records of high-net-worth clients, and according to his LinkedIn profile, had previously worked for a company that had been involved in a major lawsuit with Coleman Burton Engineering 3 years earlier. The lawsuit had been over a construction defect in a residential development. Glenn and Wesley's firm had been hired as expert witnesses to prove that the defects were caused by shoddy construction practices, not engineering flaws. Their testimony had cost the construction company millions in damages and led to several executives facing criminal charges. Mitchell Walker had been the project finance manager for that construction company. "I've got you, you son of a bitch," Glenn muttered, printing out every document he could find linking Walker to both the failed development and Riverside Financial. His phone buzzed with a text from Wesley. "Found something. The plant's source network traces back to a lab in Mexico that was shut down last year for illegal bioweapons research. Someone with serious connections provided this." Glenn typed back, "I know who. Meet me tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. Coffee shop on 5th Street. I'll explain everything." He spent the next hour setting up a hidden camera system in the bedroom, using equipment left over from a security consultation his firm had done for a corporate client. The cameras were practically invisible, designed to look like smoke detector components and electrical outlet covers. If someone was coming into their house to maintain the plant, he would know about it. That night, Glenn lay in bed listening to Melanie's peaceful breathing, the deadly plant just a few feet away releasing its invisible poison into the air. But instead of fear, he felt something else building in his chest, a cold, calculating rage that reminded him of his military training. Whoever Mitchell Walker was working with, whatever their ultimate goal, they had made a fundamental miscalculation. They thought they were dealing with a soft, suburban family man who would never see the threat coming. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. Around 2 a.m., the hidden cameras picked up movement. Glenn watched from his home office as a figure in dark clothing entered through the back door, a door that should have been locked. The intruder moved with practiced efficiency, knowing exactly where to go and what to do. The figure was small and slight, definitely female, wearing a ski mask and gloves. She went directly to the bedroom, spent 5 minutes doing something to the plant Glenn couldn't quite see from the camera angle, then disappeared the same way she'd come. Glenn checked the locks after she left. No signs of forced entry, which meant she had a key. In the morning, after Melanie and the kids left for their daily routines, Glenn examined the plant more closely. Fresh white crystals had been added to the soil, and the leaves looked healthier, more vibrant. Someone was definitely maintaining the plant to ensure maximum lethality. Glenn's phone rang as he was photographing the new evidence. "Glenn, get your kids and get out of that house. Leave everything." It was Wesley, and his voice was pure panic. "What's wrong?" Glenn shouted into the phone. "I just got a call from my contact at the CDC. Someone reported a suspicious plant inquiry from our area. They're sending a team to investigate. Glenn, if they find that plant in your house, they'll quarantine your entire family and everyone you've been in contact with." But that's not the worst part. Glenn's chest tightened. "What?" The report came from Mitchell Walker at Riverside Financial. "He's playing both sides, poisoning you slowly while setting up a cover story for why your family gets sick. When the CDC finds the plant, it'll look like you acquired it illegally yourself, maybe for some kind of insurance fraud scheme." Glenn felt the world tilt around him. "How long do we have?" "Maybe an hour. 2 at most." "This ends now," Glenn said, his voice deadly calm. "Wes, I need you to do exactly what I tell you. We're going to turn this whole thing around on them." "What do you mean?" "I mean, Mitchell Walker and his friends are about to learn what happens when you threaten a combat engineer's family. Get over here now and bring every piece of documentation we have on the original lawsuit. It's time to go on the offense." As Glenn hung up the phone, he looked at the deadly plant one more time. Soon, it would be evidence in a very different kind of case than Walker had planned. The hunter was about to become the hunted. Chapter 3. The trap is set. Glenn had 30 minutes before Wesley arrived and maybe an hour before the CDC team showed up, if Walker was telling the truth about the timeline. He moved through his house with military precision, collecting evidence, photographing everything, and preparing for what would either be the smartest gambit of his life or a spectacular disaster. First, he retrieved the soil samples Wesley had secretly taken the night before and sealed them in evidence bags with timestamps and location data. Then he printed out every financial document linking Walker to both Riverside Financial and the construction company that had lost the lawsuit 3 years earlier. The key to any successful trap was understanding your enemy's psychology. Walker thought he was dealing with a typical suburban target, someone who would panic when confronted with authority figures and would be too confused to mount an effective defense. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. Glenn's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "CDC team ETA, 45 minutes. Suggest you prepare explanations for illegal botanical acquisition." So Walker was monitoring his communications. Glenn smiled grimly and typed back, "Thanks for the heads up. Family evacuated to hotel as precaution. Will cooperate fully with investigation." It was a lie, of course. Melanie and the kids were safely at their respective schools and activities, but Walker didn't need to know that. Let him think his plan was working perfectly. Wesley arrived 20 minutes later, carrying a briefcase full of documents and looking like he hadn't slept in days. "Tell me you have a plan," he said, setting the briefcase on Glenn's kitchen table. "I do, but it's going to require perfect timing and a lot of trust. Glenn spread out a detailed floor plan of the house he'd drawn that morning. The CDC team will want to examine the plant and the bedroom. When they do, they're going to find evidence that someone has been maintaining it with illegal chemical enhancers. Right, but they'll assume it was us. Not if we give them a better explanation. Glenn pointed to marked locations on the floor plan. I've planted evidence that will lead them to the truth, but only if they know where to look. That's where you come in. Wesley examined the floor plan. What kind of evidence? The hidden cameras caught our midnight visitor last night. But more importantly, I set up motion sensors throughout the house this morning. If someone tries to enter while we're dealing with the CDC, we'll have real-time proof that the threat is external. You think Walker will try something while the CDC is here? I'm counting on it. His whole plan depends on us being too panicked and confused to mount a coherent defense. He'll want to ensure the evidence is exactly where the CDC expects to find it. Glenn's expression hardened. What he doesn't know is that I've replaced the chemical enhancers with harmless plant food and hidden the real evidence where he'll never think to look. Wesley was beginning to understand. You're going to let him walk into his own trap. Exactly, but we need to be smart about this. When the CDC team arrives, we cooperate completely. We tell them the truth, that Melanie bought the plant from Galloway Botanical Specialties, that we only discovered its true nature yesterday, and that we suspect someone has been using it as a weapon against our family. And if they don't believe us, Glenn pulled out his laptop and showed Wesley the financial trail he'd uncovered. Then we show them this. Walker's connection to the original lawsuit, the suspicious timing of our interactions with Riverside Financial, and the fact that Aurora Galloway died 2 years ago. 20 minutes later, Glenn watched through his office window as 2 black SUVs pulled into his driveway. 4 people in CDC hazmat suits emerged, along with 2 agents in dark suits who were definitely not medical personnel. Glenn's doorbell rang precisely at 11 a.m. Mr. Coleman? I'm Dr. Sarah Chun from the Centers for Disease Control. We've received a report about a potentially dangerous biological specimen in your home. Glenn opened the door wide, projecting calm cooperation. Thank you for coming so quickly. My partner and I discovered the plant's true nature yesterday, and we've been trying to figure out what to do. Dr. Chun raised an eyebrow. Your partner? Wesley Burton. He's an environmental engineer with botanical expertise. He identified the plant from a photograph. The CDC team followed Glenn into his house, Wesley trailing behind with his briefcase of documentation. Glenn watched their faces as they entered the bedroom and saw the plant. My God, Dr. Chun breathed. How long has this been in your house? 3 days, Glenn replied. My wife purchased it from a place called Galloway Botanical Specialties. We can provide you with all the details. One of the suited agents stepped forward. Mr. Coleman, I'm Agent Rodriguez with the FBI. We're going to need you to walk us through exactly how you acquired this specimen. Glenn had been expecting this. The FBI's involvement meant Walker had spun this as a potential terrorism case, not just a health hazard. Of course, Glenn said. But first, I need to show you something that I think will change your perspective on what's really happening here. He led them to his office and pulled up the financial records on his computer. 3 years ago, my engineering firm provided expert testimony in a lawsuit that cost Hartwell Construction Company millions of dollars. The project finance manager for that company was Mitchell Walker. 6 months ago, Walker began handling all of our family's financial accounts through Riverside Financial Group. 3 days ago, my wife purchased this plant from a woman using the identity of Aurora Galloway, who died in Oregon 2 years ago. Dr. Chun and Agent Rodriguez exchanged glances. Are you suggesting someone is trying to poison your family in revenge for a business dispute? Rodriguez asked. I'm suggesting you examine the plant's soil composition and compare it to what someone maintaining it would need to bring in regularly, Glenn replied. Wesley opened his briefcase and pulled out chemical analysis reports. The plant's soil contains synthetic enhancers that need to be replenished every few days to maintain toxicity. Someone with access to this house has been maintaining it. Glenn's motion sensors chimed on his phone. Someone was in the house. Agent Rodriguez. Glenn said quietly, someone just entered my house through the back door. The FBI agent immediately radioed for backup while drawing his weapon. The CDC team took cover behind Glenn's desk as armed agents moved through the house. 2 minutes later, they returned with a woman in handcuffs, the same slight figure Glenn had seen on camera the night before. Found her in the bedroom, messing with the plant, one of the agents reported. She had keys to the house and a bag full of chemical compounds. Agent Rodriguez looked at Glenn with newfound respect. "Mr. Coleman, how did you know she was coming?" "Because I've been tracking this conspiracy for the past 24 hours, Glenn replied. "And I suspected that whoever was behind it would try to ensure their evidence was perfect before you examined it." The woman in custody was identified as Carrie Hahn, a former lab technician from the Mexican facility that had produced the illegal plant. Financial records quickly revealed payments from Mitchell Walker dating back 6 months. When confronted with the evidence, Hahn broke immediately. Walker had hired her to maintain the plant and had promised her immunity from prosecution for her role in the Mexican lab's illegal activities. The plan had been to slowly poison Glenn's family while setting up a cover story that would make their deaths look like Glenn's own fault. Revenge for a business rival while destroying his reputation posthumously. Agent Rodriguez arrested Mitchell Walker at his office that afternoon. Walker's computer contained detailed plans for the scheme, including backup methods if the plant didn't work quickly enough. But Glenn's trap had one final element. "Agent Rodriguez," he said as they wrapped up the investigation, "I need to ask you to search Walker's home and office for evidence of other ongoing cases. If he was willing to do this to my family over a 3-year-old lawsuit, I suspect we're not his only targets." They found evidence of 4 other families that Walker had been targeting through various means, all clients of Riverside Financial who had somehow cost him money or professional standing in the past. 2 other families had already shown early symptoms of poisoning from plants Walker had arranged for them to receive. Walker's arrest undoubtedly saved multiple lives. That evening, as Glenn sat on his back porch watching Emma and Ethan play in their yard, the deadly plant long since removed by the CDC team, Melanie curled up beside him on their porch swing. "I still can't believe someone tried to kill us over a business dispute," she said softly. "Some people can't handle losing," Glenn replied, wrapping his arm around her. "But they picked the wrong family to mess with." Melanie smiled up at him. "My badass engineer husband, always thinking 10 steps ahead." Glenn kissed the top of her head, thinking about the trap he'd set and how perfectly it had worked. Walker had been so focused on his elaborate revenge scheme that he'd never considered the possibility that his targets might fight back with equal intelligence and considerably more skill. "Just protecting what matters most," he said simply. As the sun set behind their house, Glenn felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with winning and everything to do with family. Walker and his associates would spend the next several decades in federal prison. The other families Walker had targeted would receive the medical treatment they needed, and the Coleman family would sleep safely in their own beds, no longer threatened by the deadly bloom that had briefly brought such terror into their lives. Sometimes, Glenn reflected, the best revenge was simply being smarter than your enemies and making sure justice was served exactly as it should be. Chapter 4. The Deeper Web. 3 days after Walker's arrest, Glenn thought the nightmare was over. The CDC had cleared their house. Carrie Hahn had pleaded guilty to multiple charges, and Mitchell Walker was being held without bail pending trial. The other families Walker had targeted were recovering under medical supervision, and Glenn's family was trying to return to normal. That's when Wesley called with news that changed everything. "Glenn, we have a problem. A big one." Glenn was in his office, trying to catch up on the work he'd missed during the crisis. "What now?" "I've been going through the financial records the FBI shared with us, trying to understand the full scope of Walker's operation. The money trail goes a lot deeper than we thought." Glenn set down his coffee, suddenly alert. "How deep?" Walker was just middle management. The money for Carrie Hahn, the lab equipment, the property purchase for the fake botanical garden. It all traces back to a shell company called Meridian Holdings. And Meridian Holdings is owned by someone you know. "Who?" "Roland Booth." Glenn felt the room temperature drop 10 degrees. Roland Booth had been the CEO of Hartwell Construction, The man who'd lost everything when Glenn and Wesley's testimony exposed the construction defects 3 years ago. Unlike Walker, who'd simply lost his job, Booth had faced criminal charges, lost his company, and spent 18 months in federal prison. Where is Booth now? That's the thing. He was released 6 months ago, right around the time this whole operation started. Glenn's mind raced through the implications. Walker's plan hadn't been simple revenge. It had been a carefully orchestrated campaign directed by someone with far more resources and motivation. If Booth is behind this, then Walker wasn't the end of it, Glenn realized. He was just the first phase. There's more, Wesley continued. I found property records showing that Booth has been using various aliases to purchase real estate all around the city. Glenn, he's got properties within 5 miles of the kids' school, Melanie's office, and your gym. Glenn felt that familiar combat readiness flood through his system. He's been watching us, learning our routines, for months, maybe longer. And if the plant was just phase 1, then we need to figure out what phase 2 looks like before it starts. Glenn was already pulling up maps on his computer, marking the locations Wesley had mentioned. Can you get over here? I need to know everything about these properties and what Booth might be planning. An hour later, Wesley arrived with a folder full of surveillance photos he'd taken that morning. They spread everything out on Glenn's dining room table. Property records, financial documents, and photographs of 3 different buildings Booth had purchased under false names. This one concerns me the most, Wesley said, pointing to photos of a warehouse about 2 miles from Riverside Private Academy. It was purchased 4 months ago, and according to utility records, someone's been running high-powered electrical equipment there regularly. Glenn studied the photos. The warehouse was in an industrial area with limited foot traffic, perfect for someone who wanted to operate without observation. What kind of equipment are we talking about? The power consumption patterns suggest laboratory equipment. Maybe manufacturing. Manufacturing what? I don't know, but given what we know about Booth's resources and his access to illegal biological materials. Wesley didn't need to finish the sentence. Glenn's phone rang. The caller ID showed Riverside Private Academy. Mr. Coleman? This is Principal Stevens. I'm calling because we've had some unusual activity around the school today. A man claiming to be conducting a safety inspection was asking detailed questions about our emergency procedures and evacuation routes. When we asked for his credentials, he left abruptly. Glenn's blood turned to ice. Can you describe this man? Medium height, gray hair, maybe 55 years old. He seemed particularly interested in the pickup procedures for your children. Roland Booth was in his mid-50s and had gray hair. Principal Stevens, I need you to implement your highest security protocols immediately. Don't let Emma and Ethan leave the building with anyone except my wife or me. I'll be there in 20 minutes to explain everything. Glenn hung up and looked at Wesley. He's making his move. They drove to the school together, Glenn calling Melanie on the way to warn her to stay away from her office and meet them at the school instead. He didn't tell her why over the phone, just that there was a security concern and she needed to trust him. At Riverside Private Academy, Principal Stevens led them to his office and showed them security camera footage from the morning. The man asking questions was definitely Roland Booth, though he looked different than he had 3 years ago, thinner, harder, with the kind of cold focus that Glenn recognized from his military days. He knew a lot about the school's layout and routines, Principal Stevens said. More than someone conducting a random safety inspection should know. Glenn studied the footage, analyzing Booth's movements and body language. He wasn't here for an inspection. He was doing reconnaissance for something specific. Like what? Wesley asked. Glenn's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Nice trap with Walker. Too bad he was expendable. Phase 2 begins tonight. Your children are very beautiful when they sleep. Wesley read the message over Glenn's shoulder. Oh God. Glenn immediately called the FBI agent who had handled Walker's case. Agent Rodriguez? We have an escalation. 20 minutes later, Agent Rodriguez arrived at the school with a full security team. Glenn showed him everything they discovered about Booth's involvement and the threatening message. We'll put protection details on your family immediately, Rodriguez said. But Mr. Coleman, I have to ask, is there somewhere safe you can take them until we can locate Booth? Glenn had been thinking about this. My brother Chad lives on a ranch in Wyoming. Military background, defensible location, completely off the grid where Booth is concerned. That might be wise. But Glenn shook his head. No, running won't solve this. Booth has resources, patience, and a 3-year grudge. If we run now, he'll just wait and strike when we least expect it. What are you suggesting? Glenn looked at the security camera footage again, this time focusing on something he'd missed before. In one frame, Booth was checking his watch and looking directly at a specific camera. He hadn't been trying to avoid surveillance. He'd been making sure he was seen. He wants us to run, Glenn realized. This whole thing at the school was theater. He's trying to panic us into making mistakes. Agent Rodriguez frowned. That's a pretty sophisticated psychological operation. Roland Booth spent 18 months in federal prison thinking about what he wanted to do to the people who destroyed his life. He had time to plan, time to think, and access to other inmates with specialized skills. Glenn's mind was working through the tactical situation. He's not just after revenge anymore. He wants to completely destroy everything we've built, the same way we destroyed his company. Wesley had been quiet during this exchange, but now he looked up from the financial documents he'd been reviewing. Glenn, look at this. The timing of Booth's property purchases corresponds with specific events in your family's life. He bought the warehouse 2 days after Emma made honor roll. He purchased a house 3 blocks from your neighborhood the week after you got promoted. He's been watching you celebrate your successes and planning to take them away. The psychological profile was becoming clearer. This wasn't just about the lawsuit anymore. It was about a man who'd lost everything and wanted to make sure Glenn experienced the same systematic destruction. Agent Rodriguez, Glenn said, I need you to understand something. Roland Booth isn't going to stop with threats and biological weapons. He's building towards something bigger, something designed to cause maximum psychological damage while looking like tragic accidents. What do you recommend? Glenn thought about the warehouse, the surveillance, the calculated psychological pressure. We give him exactly what he thinks he wants. We make him believe his plan is working perfectly. I don't understand. Glenn smiled grimly. Roland Booth thinks he's playing chess with a suburban engineer who got lucky once. He's about to learn that some people are much more dangerous when you threaten their families than when you threaten them directly. Wesley recognized that look in his partner's eyes. Glenn, what are you planning? I'm going to give Mr. Booth the war he's been preparing for. But it's going to be fought on my terms, not his. Agent Rodriguez looked between the 2 engineers. Mr. Coleman, I can't authorize any kind of vigilante operation. You won't have to. Everything I'm going to do will be completely legal and fully documented. But by the time I'm finished, Roland Booth is going to wish he'd stayed in federal prison. Glenn pulled out his phone and started making calls. Chad, it's Glenn. I need to borrow some of your old military equipment, and I need you to come to Denver. Tonight, the war for Glenn Coleman's family was about to begin in earnest. Chapter 5, The Counterattack. That evening, Chad Coleman arrived at Glenn's house, carrying a duffel bag and wearing the same predatory smile that had made him legendary in Army Special Operations. The 2 brothers hadn't seen each other in 6 months, but Glenn knew he could count on Chad when family was threatened. So, Chad said, setting his bag on the kitchen table, some wannabe criminal mastermind thinks he can terrorize my niece and nephew. Glenn brought his brother up to speed on everything. Walker's plant scheme, Booth's involvement, and the psychological warfare that was clearly just beginning. Chad listened with the focused attention of a professional soldier, asking tactical questions and identifying vulnerabilities. This Booth character made a classic mistake, Chad said when Glenn finished. He gave you time to prepare, and he showed you his capabilities before committing to a direct assault. What do you mean? Think about it. The plant was slow-acting, designed to look natural. Walker's arrest exposed the financial trail, which led you to Booth. Then Booth shows up at the school, making barely concealed threats. He's escalating, but he's doing it predictably. Wesley, who had joined them for dinner, looked confused. Isn't that bad for us? If he's escalating, Chad shook his head. It's bad if you're a victim. It's perfect if you're a predator. Glenn understood immediately. You're saying we flip the script. Instead of reacting to his attacks, we start hunting him. Exactly. But we do it smart. Legal, documented, and absolutely ruthless within those constraints. Chad opened his duffel bag and revealed an array of surveillance equipment that made Glenn's hidden cameras look like toys. Military-grade night vision, motion sensors, long-range audio equipment, and GPS trackers. All commercially available, all legal to use on your own property or in public spaces. What's the plan? Glenn asked. We turned Booth's own surveillance system against him. He's been watching your family for months, learning your routines. Now we watch him back, learn his routines, and figure out exactly what he's planning for Phase 2. They spent the next 2 hours setting up a comprehensive surveillance network. Chad's experience in covert operations showed in every detail. Camera placements that would be invisible to anyone not trained in counter-surveillance. Motion sensors that could track movement patterns across several city blocks, and audio equipment that could pick up conversations from a quarter-mile away. The warehouse is our primary target, Chad said, studying satellite photos on Glenn's computer. If he's manufacturing something there, we need to know what it is. How do we get close enough to find out without breaking any laws? Chad smiled. We don't get close. We let technology do the work. He pulled out what looked like a small drone, but more sophisticated than any consumer model Glenn had seen. This little beauty can get us thermal imaging, audio recording, and chemical analysis from a safe distance. Completely legal as long as we stay in public airspace and don't interfere with his property rights. Meanwhile, Glenn had been working on a different angle. I've been thinking about Booth's psychology. He spent 18 months in prison because of our testimony. He's not just after revenge. He wants vindication. He wants to prove that we destroyed an innocent man's life. Wesley looked up from the financial documents he'd been analyzing. How does that help us? Because it means he can't just kill us quickly and quietly. He needs us to suffer publicly, and he needs the suffering to look like natural consequences of our own actions. Chad nodded slowly. So he's going to try to destroy your reputation first, then your family. Which means his next move will be something that makes us look guilty of something terrible, Glenn continued. Something that turns public opinion against us and makes our deaths look like justice. Glenn's phone buzzed with another message from Booth. You destroyed my life with lies. Tomorrow, everyone will see what kind of man you really are. That's not a death threat, Chad observed. That's a promise to expose something. Glenn felt a chill of recognition. He's going to frame us for something. Make it look like we're the real criminals. But frame you for what? Before Glenn could answer, Wesley's laptop chimed with an alert. Guys, we have movement at the warehouse. The surveillance feed showed Roland Booth's car pulling up to the warehouse, followed by a panel van Glenn didn't recognize. Several people emerged from the van, carrying equipment that looked disturbingly sophisticated. Can you get thermal imaging? Glenn asked. Chad operated the drone controls with practiced efficiency. Coming up now. Jesus, Glenn, look at this. The thermal image showed at least 8 people inside the warehouse, gathered around what appeared to be large-scale manufacturing equipment. The heat signatures suggested chemical processing, something that required precise temperature control. Chemical manufacturing, Chad said grimly. This isn't about revenge anymore. This is about creating enough evidence to frame you for domestic terrorism. Glenn's mind raced through the possibilities. They're going to manufacture evidence that we were involved in producing illegal weapons. Maybe make it look like the plant was just a test run for something bigger. And when they discover this evidence, it destroys our credibility completely. Anything we say about being targeted looks like desperate lies from exposed terrorists. Wesley was frantically typing on his laptop. I'm cross-referencing the people in that van with known associates of Roland Booth. If we can identify them, maybe we can figure out exactly what they're planning. Chad studied the thermal imaging more carefully. Glenn, I don't think we have time for a detailed investigation. Whatever they're manufacturing in there, they're working fast. I guess we have maybe 12 hours before they deploy it. Then we need to move tonight. Move how? We can't just break into his warehouse. Glenn smiled, and Wesley recognized that dangerous expression from 3 days earlier. We don't break in. We let them come to us, and we make sure they bring all their evidence with them. I don't understand. Roland Booth wants to destroy my reputation by making me look like a terrorist. Fine. Let's give him an opportunity he can't resist. Glenn pulled out his phone and dialed Agent Rodriguez's number. Agent Rodriguez? Glenn Coleman. I need to report a suspicious chemical smell coming from my basement. I think someone might have planted something in my house. Chad and Wesley stared at him in shock. Glenn, what are you doing? Wesley whispered. Glenn held up a hand for silence as he continued the call. I'm worried it might be connected to the Roland Booth situation. Can you send a team to investigate tonight? I want everything documented in case this is part of his plan to frame my family. After Glenn hung up, Chad shook his head in admiration. You magnificent bastard. You're going to let the FBI search your house and find nothing, which creates an official record that you're actively cooperating with law enforcement and concerned about being framed. Exactly. And when Booth moves against us tomorrow, every piece of evidence he plants will look exactly like what it is, a desperate attempt to frame an innocent family. Wesley was beginning to understand the strategy. But what if he doesn't take the bait? Glenn looked at the thermal imaging of the warehouse, where the manufacturing operation was still running at full capacity. Oh, he'll take it, because Roland Booth has been planning this revenge for 18 months, and he's not going to let the perfect opportunity slip away. He's going to try to plant that manufactured evidence tonight, while he thinks we're distracted by the FBI search. Chad was already checking his surveillance equipment, and when he does, we'll have everything documented from multiple angles. Plus, Glenn added, Agent Rodriguez will have a team standing by to respond immediately when we call in suspicious activity. Wesley looked between the two brothers. This is insane. What if something goes wrong? Glenn thought about the threat against his children, about the months of surveillance and psychological manipulation, about Roland Booth's systematic plan to destroy everything he'd built. Then Roland Booth will learn what happens when you threaten a combat engineer's family and give him time to prepare. The trap was set. In a few hours, they would learn whether Glenn's gamble would save his family or destroy everything he'd worked to protect. Chapter 6. The Perfect Trap. At 11 p.m., Agent Rodriguez arrived with a full forensics team to search Glenn's house. Glenn had made sure Melanie and the kids were staying at her sister's place, ostensibly for their safety during the investigation, but really to keep them away from what was about to unfold. I appreciate you calling this in, Mr. Coleman, Rodriguez said as his team began systematically checking the basement. Given everything that's happened with Booth, we need to take every precaution. Glenn nodded, playing his role perfectly. I just want to make sure he can't plant evidence and claim we were manufacturing something dangerous. Better to have it officially documented that our house is clean. The search took 2 hours and turned up exactly nothing, which was precisely what Glenn had expected. Rodriguez had his team photograph and document every room, creating an official federal record that Glenn Coleman's house contained no illegal materials as of 1 a.m. on Thursday morning. After the FBI team left, Glenn, Chad, and Wesley gathered in the surveillance command center Chad had set up in Glenn's office. Multiple screens showed feeds from around the neighborhood, the warehouse, and key locations throughout the city. Now we wait, Chad said, settling in with a cup of coffee. If Booth is planning to plant evidence, he'll do it in the next few hours while he thinks the heat has died down. What if he doesn't? Wesley asked. Then we go to phase 2, Glenn replied. But I'm betting he can't resist the opportunity. His whole plan depends on making us look guilty, and he just got confirmation that we're clean as of tonight. At 3:17 a.m., the motion sensors around Glenn's neighborhood triggered. Chad pulled up the camera feeds and swore softly. We've got movement. 2 vehicles approaching from different directions. Glenn watched as the vehicles stopped 3 blocks away from his house. 8 figures in dark clothing emerged, carrying equipment bags and what looked like portable manufacturing equipment. They're not just planting evidence, Glenn realized. They're going to manufacture it on-site to make it look fresher. Chad was already on his radio, coordinating with the backup surveillance positions he'd established earlier. I've got eyes on the primary target. Booth is with them, directing the operation. Glenn called Agent Rodriguez. Agent Rodriguez, I've got suspicious activity around my house. Multiple vehicles, people in dark clothing carrying equipment. I think Booth is making his move. We're en route. ETA 8 minutes. Do not engage, just observe and document. Glenn smiled grimly. Don't worry, I have no intention of engaging. I want them caught in the act with all the evidence on them. The surveillance feeds showed Booth's team moving through Glenn's neighborhood with practiced efficiency. They had clearly studied the area extensively. They knew exactly where the streetlights were, which houses had dogs, and the optimal approach routes. They're splitting up, Chad observed. Looks like simultaneous entry points, front and back of the house. Glenn watched as several team members began setting up what appeared to be a portable chemical lab in his backyard, while others prepared to enter the house itself. This is beautiful, Wesley said, somewhat awed by the complexity of what they were witnessing. They're not just framing you. They're creating a complete crime scene designed to support a domestic terrorism narrative. Which means when the FBI arrives, they're going to find Booth and his team in the middle of manufacturing evidence, Glenn replied. Red-handed, with all their equipment and plans. The surveillance footage would be damning, but Glenn wanted more than just a conviction. He wanted to understand the full scope of Booth's operation and make sure there were no other surprises waiting for his family. Chad, can you get audio from the backyard? Chad adjusted his equipment. Coming through now. Booth's voice came through clearly. The chemical residue needs to look like it's been here for weeks. Make sure the containers have partial fingerprints, but nothing too obvious. And remember, the detonation timer components go in the basement workshop area. Glenn felt his blood run cold. Detonation timer components? He's not just framing you for manufacturing chemical weapons, Chad said grimly. He's framing you for planning a bombing. Wesley pulled up news articles on his laptop. Glenn, there's a major political rally scheduled for this weekend at the convention center. 5,000 people expected, including the governor and 2 senators. Glenn understood immediately. He's going to make it look like we were planning to bomb the political rally, and he's going to discover the evidence just in time to stop the attack and look like a hero. Jesus, Chad muttered. This isn't just revenge anymore. He's trying to turn himself into some kind of folk hero who exposed a terrorist plot. Agent Rodriguez's voice crackled through Glenn's radio. We're in position. Count of suspects. Glenn checked the surveillance feeds. 8 total, including Booth. They're currently manufacturing evidence in my backyard and placing materials inside my house. Full documentation is being recorded. Understood. Moving in now. What happened next was chaos, but orchestrated chaos that Glenn had been planning for hours. FBI agents surrounded the house from all directions simultaneously, trapping Booth's team in the middle of their evidence-planting operation. The surveillance footage caught everything. Booth directing his team to place chemical residue in specific locations, the portable lab being used to manufacture fake explosive components, and most damaging of all, Booth himself explaining to his team exactly how the evidence should be arranged to support their narrative. This is for destroying my life, Booth snarled as Agent Rodriguez placed him in handcuffs. You ruined everything I built, and I was going to return the favor. Glenn emerged from his house as the arrests were being made, making sure the surveillance cameras caught his interaction with law enforcement. Agent Rodriguez, I can't thank you enough for taking this seriously. I was terrified that he might try to plant evidence. You did the right thing, Mr. Coleman. If you hadn't called us when you did, he might have successfully framed you for domestic terrorism. The beauty of Glenn's trap wasn't just that it caught Booth in the act. It was that it created an official federal record of Glenn's complete cooperation with law enforcement and his proactive efforts to prevent being framed. Every aspect of Booth's revenge plan was now documented as exactly what it was, an elaborate criminal conspiracy. Over the next few hours, as the FBI processed the crime scene and interrogated the suspects, the full scope of Booth's operation became clear. He had spent 6 months and nearly $500,000 creating an elaborate plan to destroy Glenn's family through a combination of slow poison, manufactured evidence, and staged terrorism charges. But like Walker before him, Booth had underestimated his target. He thought he was dealing with a lucky suburban engineer who had stumbled into one successful business victory. Instead, he'd gone to war with a combat veteran who had turned Booth's own elaborate plan into a perfect trap. Mr. Coleman, Agent Rodriguez said as the last of the suspects was loaded into FBI vehicles. "I have to ask, how did you know exactly when and how they would try to plant evidence?" Glenn looked at his house, where crime scene technicians were photographing all the fake evidence Booth's team had been caught placing. Roland Booth made the same mistake that criminals always make when they're dealing with engineers, Glenn replied. He assumed that because we think systematically, we can't think tactically. He planned his revenge like an engineering project, methodical, predictable, and vulnerable to someone who understood the system better than he did. Agent Rodriguez shook his head in admiration. "Well, thanks to your planning, we've got enough evidence to put Booth and his entire operation away for the next 20 years. And we've prevented what could have been a devastating attack on that political rally." Glenn nodded, but his mind was already moving ahead to the next challenge. Booth might be neutralized, but his arrest would likely trigger investigations into everyone he'd been working with, everyone who had funded his operation, and everyone who might have similar grievances against the Coleman family. The war might be won, but Glenn had learned enough about his enemies to know that the peace would require constant vigilance. Chapter 7: Unraveling the Network. The interrogation of Roland Booth and his associates revealed a conspiracy far more extensive than Glenn had imagined. What had started as one man's revenge plot had evolved into a network of criminals, ex-convicts, and corrupt professionals who had been systematically targeting families they blamed for their legal troubles. Agent Rodriguez called Glenn the next morning with disturbing news. "We've been going through Booth's financial records and communications," Rodriguez said. "He wasn't just targeting your family. We've identified at least 12 other families across 5 states who were being stalked, harassed, or worse by this network." Glenn felt a chill run through him. How many others used the plant method? 3. All successful professionals who had provided testimony that resulted in criminal convictions. 2 of the families are already showing symptoms of poisoning, and 1. Rodriguez paused. 1 family in Phoenix didn't make it. Glenn closed his eyes, thinking about another family somewhere who had received a beautiful exotic plant as a gift and had no reason to suspect it was anything other than what it appeared to be. What about the people funding this operation? That's where things get really interesting. Booth was essentially running a revenge-for-hire service, funded by wealthy clients who wanted to destroy people without getting their own hands dirty. Wesley, who had been listening to the call on speaker, looked up from his laptop. A revenge service? Like a business. Complete with client consultation, customized attack plans, and ongoing surveillance services. Booth had turned his personal vendetta into a profitable criminal enterprise. Glenn felt his tactical mind engage. "Agent Rodriguez, has Booth been talking?" "Not willingly, but his computer files are very comprehensive. He documented everything: client contracts, target profiles, operational timelines. The man was meticulous." "What about his clients? Are they still active threats?" "That's why I'm calling. We've identified 3 clients who specifically requested services targeting your family. Booth was just the contractor. They're the ones who paid for the extended surveillance and the plant operation." Glenn exchanged glances with Wesley. "Who are they?" "Arnold Short, former CFO of Hartwell Construction. Carrie Mendoza, who lost a medical malpractice lawsuit where you testified as an expert witness 2 years ago. And," Rodriguez paused, "Stephen McIntyre, current board member of Riverside Private Academy." Glenn felt the world tilt around him. "McIntyre is on the board of my kid's school. Not just on the board. He's the chairman of the security committee. He's had access to detailed information about your children's schedules, pickup procedures, and emergency contact for over a year." Wesley was already pulling up information on his laptop. "Glenn, McIntyre was one of the investors who lost money in the medical device company we exposed last year. The one that was selling faulty surgical implants." Glenn remembered the case. His firm had been hired to analyze the mechanical failures in a series of surgical implants that had caused dozens of patients to require additional surgeries. Their testimony had not only resulted in criminal charges, but had also triggered a cascade of civil lawsuits that had bankrupted several companies. "How much access has McIntyre had to information about our family?" Rodriguez's voice was grim. Complete access. School records, medical information for enrollment, emergency contact procedures, even architectural plans of the school buildings. If someone wanted to target your children specifically, McIntyre could have provided everything they needed. Glenn's protective instincts went into overdrive. Where is he now? We're tracking him down, but his house appears to be empty and his office says he hasn't been in for 3 days. Glenn was already moving toward his gun safe. Agent Rodriguez, I need protection details on my family immediately. If McIntyre has been planning something specific targeting the kids. Already arranged. But Glenn, there's something else. We found evidence that McIntyre has been in contact with other parents at Riverside Private Academy. Other families who've had business disputes or legal problems in the past. He's been recruiting. It looks like it. We think he was using his position on the school board to identify wealthy families with enemies, then connecting those families with booth services. Wesley looked up from his research. Glenn, this is massive. If McIntyre was essentially running a referral service for revenge operations, then there could be dozens of other families in danger right now. Glenn finished. Glenn's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Your children look so peaceful when they sleep. Too bad you won't be around to protect them much longer. Agent Rodriguez heard Glenn's sharp intake of breath. What is it? Glenn read the message aloud. Rodriguez immediately got on his radio, coordinating with the protection details assigned to Glenn's family. All units, possible imminent threat to the Coleman family. Increase alert status immediately. But Glenn was already thinking beyond immediate protection. Agent Rodriguez, McIntyre has been planning this for over a year. He has detailed knowledge of our routines, our security measures, and our children's schedules. Traditional protection might not be enough. What are you suggesting? Glenn looked at Chad, who had been monitoring the conversation with the focused attention of a professional soldier. I'm suggesting that Stephen McIntyre is about to learn the same lesson that Roland Booth just learned. You don't threaten a combat engineer's family and expect to walk away. Chad was already checking his equipment. What's the plan? Glenn pulled up the architectural plans of Riverside Private Academy on his computer. McIntyre knows the school's security procedures because he helped design them. But he doesn't know that we know he's involved. You want to use the school as bait? I want to use ourselves as bait. McIntyre wants to hurt our children to get to us. Instead, we're going to make ourselves available and let him come after us directly. Wesley looked concerned. That's incredibly dangerous. Glenn nodded. It is, but it's also the only way to end this permanently. As long as McIntyre is out there with his network of clients and contacts, our family will never be safe. Agent Rodriguez came back on the line. We've got movement. McIntyre's car was spotted heading toward the school district. He's not alone. At least 3 other vehicles in convoy. Glenn felt that familiar combat calm descend over him. Agent Rodriguez, I need you to coordinate with Chad on positioning your tactical teams. We're going to end this tonight. Glenn, I can't authorize you to engage in active combat operations. You don't have to. Everything we're going to do will be in defense of our family and in full cooperation with federal law enforcement. But when this is over, Stephen McIntyre and his network are going to wish they'd chosen different targets. Chad was already suiting up in tactical gear. It's time to show these people what happens when you threaten the wrong family. Glenn looked at the surveillance feeds showing McIntyre's convoy approaching their neighborhood. After months of being hunted, it was time to become the hunter. The final battle for the Coleman family's safety was about to begin. Chapter 8, The Final Gambit. Glenn's plan was elegantly simple. Instead of hiding from McIntyre, he would make himself an irresistible target while leading the attack into a carefully prepared killing ground. But first, he needed to ensure his family's absolute safety. Chad, I need you to get Melanie and the kids to your ranch in Wyoming. Tonight. What about you? I'm staying here to finish this. McIntyre won't stop until he gets personal revenge against me specifically. If I'm not here, he might go after the kids wherever they are. Wesley looked up from the tactical communications setup he'd been monitoring. The FBI intercepts are showing increased chatter between McIntyre and at least 6 other individuals. Glenn, this isn't just one man with a grudge anymore. This is a coordinated assault. Agent Rodriguez's voice crackled through the radio. Glenn, we've confirmed that McIntyre has been in contact with several former military contractors, the kind of people who know how to conduct urban warfare operations. Glenn nodded grimly. Then we make sure this urban warfare happens exactly where and when we want it to. Chad finished loading his vehicle with Melanie and the kids' belongings. I can have them in Wyoming in 12 hours. But Glenn, I don't like leaving you here alone. I won't be alone. Wesley's staying, and Agent Rodriguez has a full tactical team in position. Glenn knelt down to hug Emma and Ethan goodbye, trying to project calm confidence while his heart was breaking at the thought of the danger they'd been in. Daddy, why do we have to go to Uncle Chad's ranch? Emma asked. Because there are some bad people who want to hurt our family, and Uncle Chad's ranch is the safest place for you and Mom to be while I take care of the problem. Ethan, who had always been the more perceptive of the twins, looked at his father with 8-year-old seriousness. Are you going to stop the bad people, Dad? Yes, son, I am. And when I do, they'll never be able to hurt any family ever again. After Chad left with Glenn's family, the house felt strangely empty. But it also felt like what it was about to become, a fortress designed to protect what Glenn valued most. Wesley had been monitoring electronic communications all day. Glenn, McIntyre's people are conducting surveillance on the house right now. They know Melanie and the kids left with Chad. Good. That means they'll assume I'm alone and vulnerable. Agent Rodriguez arrived at 10 p.m. with a tactical briefing. We've identified 7 individuals working with McIntyre, including 2 former special operations soldiers and a demolitions expert. They're not just planning to hurt you, Glenn. They're planning to make it look like a home invasion gone wrong. What's their timeline? Based on our intercepts, they're moving tonight, probably between 2 and 4 a.m. when they think you'll be asleep. Glenn looked at the defensive preparations he and Chad had made earlier. Perfect. That gives us time to make sure everything is ready. The house had been transformed into a tactical nightmare for anyone attempting to breach it. Every entry point had been rigged with motion sensors, cameras, and defensive measures that would channel attackers into predetermined kill zones. More importantly, every aspect of the defense had been designed to be legally justifiable as protection of Glenn's home and family. The beauty of this setup, Glenn explained to Agent Rodriguez, is that we're not ambushing them. They're breaking into my house with intent to commit murder. Everything we do after that is legal self-defense. At 1:47 a.m., the perimeter sensors triggered. 7 figures in tactical gear were approaching the house from multiple directions, using military-style coordination and communication. Glenn watched from his reinforced command center as McIntyre's team moved into position. They were good, professional, disciplined, and well-equipped. Under normal circumstances, they probably would have succeeded in their mission. But these weren't normal circumstances. They were attacking the home of a combat engineer who had had weeks to prepare and had unlimited federal law enforcement backup. Agent Rodriguez, they're moving into position. Are your teams ready? Standing by. Glenn, once this starts, you follow our lead. These people are professional killers. Glenn checked his weapon and body armor one final time. Agent Rodriguez, these people made one critical mistake. What's that? They assumed I was a victim. They're about to learn I'm not. The attack began at 2:23 a.m. with a coordinated breach of 3 entry points simultaneously. McIntyre's team moved through the house with professional efficiency, using suppressed weapons and military tactics. What they found was exactly what Glenn had wanted them to find: a house that appeared to be defended by one man with limited tactical experience. Glenn led them through the house room by room, appearing to retreat in panic while actually drawing them deeper into the trap he'd prepared. Every movement had been choreographed to make McIntyre's team think they were winning while actually positioning them exactly where the FBI's tactical units could engage them most effectively. The final confrontation took place in Glenn's living room, where McIntyre himself cornered what he thought was a terrified suburban engineer. "You destroyed my life," McIntyre snarled, aiming his weapon at Glenn's chest. "You cost me everything I built, everything I worked for. Now I'm going to return the favor." Glenn looked at McIntyre with cold satisfaction. "Stephen, you made the same mistake everyone else has made." "What mistake?" "You assumed I was a victim instead of a predator." The FBI tactical team breached the room from 3 directions simultaneously, ending the threat in less than 10 seconds. McIntyre and his remaining team members were taken alive, but barely. When the smoke cleared, Agent Rodriguez found Glenn calmly documenting the scene with his phone, making sure every aspect of the defensive action was properly recorded. "It's over?" Rodriguez asked. Glenn looked at the captured attackers, then at the evidence that would ensure they spent the rest of their lives in federal prison. "The shooting's over. But McIntyre's client network is still out there, and they're going to be very unhappy when they learn their revenge service has been shut down." Wesley emerged from the command center where he'd been coordinating communications. "Actually, Glenn, I don't think that's going to be a problem." "Why not?" Wesley showed him a laptop displaying financial records. "While you were dealing with the attack, I've been tracing the money trail from all of Booth's clients. The FBI raids tonight didn't just capture McIntyre's team. They captured records that implicate over 40 people in 12 states who were paying for revenge services." Agent Rodriguez looked at the scope of the evidence. "This is going to be the largest organized crime takedown in federal history." Glenn felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with personal victory. How many families were they targeting? At least 100, maybe more. "Glenn, your decision to fight instead of hide just saved the lives of people you'll never meet." Glenn thought about the family in Phoenix who hadn't been as lucky as his own, about the dozens of families who were going to sleep safely tonight because they would never know how close they'd come to being victims of this network. "Agent Rodriguez, I want to make sure every family that was being targeted gets notified and protected until all these arrests are completed." "Already in progress." The FBI is coordinating with local law enforcement across 12 states. Glenn's phone buzzed with a message from Chad. "All secure in Wyoming. Kids asking when Dad's coming to visit the ranch." Glenn smiled, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders that had been there for weeks. "Tell them Dad will be there soon. The bad people have been stopped." As the FBI crime scene teams processed the evidence and the last of the attackers were loaded into federal transport vehicles, Glenn stood in his living room surveying the damage. His house looked like a war zone, but his family was safe, and a network of killers had been dismantled. Wesley joined him, carrying a bottle of whiskey that had somehow survived the evening's chaos. "So," Wesley said, pouring 2 glasses, "when you said you were going to show them what a real engineer could do, I don't think they expected anything quite this comprehensive." Glenn accepted the whiskey and raised his glass. "To the families we'll never meet who get to wake up safe tomorrow." They drank in silence, 2 engineers who had used their skills to protect what mattered most. The war for Glenn Coleman's family was finally over. Chapter 9. Justice and New Beginnings. 3 months later, Glenn stood in a federal courthouse in Denver watching as Stephen McIntyre received a life sentence without possibility of parole. The courtroom was packed with family members of other victims, people who had been targeted by the Revenge Network but had lived to see justice served. Agent Rodriguez sat in the gallery behind Glenn, having become something of a friend during the extensive investigation and trial preparation. The scope of the conspiracy they'd uncovered had made national news and led to congressional hearings about domestic terrorism networks. The defendant, Judge Patricia Morrison, said, orchestrated a criminal enterprise that resulted in multiple murders, attempted murders, and the systematic terrorization of over 100 American families. The court finds that the defendant poses a continuing danger to society and that no sentence short of life imprisonment would be adequate to protect the public. Glenn felt a deep satisfaction as McIntyre was led away in shackles. But the real victory wasn't the punishment of his enemies. It was the knowledge that Emma and Ethan would grow up in a world where this particular network of killers could never threaten anyone again. After the sentencing, Glenn met with some of the other families who had been targeted. The Hendersons from Phoenix, whose teenage daughter had nearly died from a poison plant. The Williams family from Texas, who had been stalked for months by hired investigators. The Johnsons from Florida, whose business had been sabotaged by arsonists working for the network. Mr. Coleman, Mrs. Henderson said. "I want to thank you for what you did. If you hadn't fought back when you did, my daughter would be dead." Glenn shook her hand, seeing his own protective fury reflected in her eyes. "Mrs. Henderson, the only reason any of us survive this is because we refuse to be victims. Your family's courage in testifying helped put these people away for life." Dr. Williams, a pediatric surgeon who had been targeted after testifying about faulty medical devices, joined the conversation. "What are you going to do now? I imagine it's hard to go back to normal life after something like this." Glenn had been thinking about that question for weeks. "Actually, Wesley and I have decided to make some changes to our engineering firm." "What kind of changes?" "We're starting a new division, security consulting for families who are being threatened or stalked. Too many people don't know how to protect themselves when they become targets, and law enforcement can't always provide adequate protection." Agent Rodriguez, who had been listening to the conversation, nodded approvingly. "There's definitely a need for that kind of service. Most people don't have your background or resources." Glenn thought about the months of fear his family had endured, about the sophisticated planning it had taken to turn the tables on their attackers. "We're calling it Coleman Burton Personal Security. The idea is to help families identify threats early, implement effective countermeasures, and work with law enforcement to resolve dangerous situations." Wesley, who had been talking with the FBI's cybercrime specialists, joined the group. "We're also working with federal agencies to develop better systems for detecting organized stalking and revenge networks before they can hurt anyone." Dr. Williams looked intrigued. "That sounds like exactly what a lot of families need. Are you taking clients?" Glenn smiled. "We officially launch next month. Our first case is already interesting. A judge in California who's been receiving death threats from a network of defendants she's sentenced over the years." The conversation was interrupted by Glenn's phone buzzing with a call from Chad in Wyoming. "Glenn, you need to get out of here. Emma just caught a fish bigger than she is, and Ethan has decided he wants to be a cowboy when he grows up. Melanie says she's never moving back to the city." Glenn laughed, the sound carrying none of the tension that had characterized his voice for months. "Tell them I'll be there tomorrow. The trial's over, and the business can wait a few more days." How did it end? Life without parole from McIntyre. Life sentences for 3 of his associates. The others got between 20 and 30 years. Nobody from this network will ever threaten a family again. Good. Emma and Ethan have been asking when they can go home. Glenn looked around the courthouse at the families who were finally able to move on with their lives, at the law enforcement officers who had worked tirelessly to bring justice. Tell them they can come home anytime they want. The bad people are gone, and they're never coming back. That evening, Glenn and Wesley sat in a Denver bar popular with law enforcement, sharing drinks with Agent Rodriguez and several other FBI agents who had worked on the case. "You know," Rodriguez said, "in 15 years with the Bureau, I've never seen a civilian operation as effective as what you pulled off. You took down a network that we didn't even know existed." Glenn raised his beer. "We got lucky. If Melanie hadn't bought that plant, if Wesley hadn't recognized what it was, if you hadn't taken the threat seriously—" "That wasn't luck," Rodriguez interrupted. "That was intelligence, preparation, and the kind of determination that most people don't have when their families are threatened. You turned a systematic attempt to destroy your family into the downfall of everyone who tried to hurt you." Wesley nodded. Plus, Glenn never forgot that this wasn't just about us. Every move he made was designed to protect other families, too. Glenn thought about the families in Phoenix, Texas, and Florida who would sleep safely that night because a network of killers was behind bars. He thought about Emma and Ethan growing up without the shadow of threat hanging over their lives. "Agent Rodriguez, I want to ask you something. In your professional opinion, do you think we've seen the end of organized revenge networks like this one?" Rodriguez considered the question seriously. "Unfortunately, no. There will always be people who want to hurt others and people willing to help them do it for money. But what you've done, exposing how these networks operate and showing that they can be defeated, that's going to make it a lot harder for them to succeed." Glenn nodded. "Then Coleman Burton Personal Security has a lot of work to do." 2 days later, Glenn stood on the porch of Chad's ranch in Wyoming, watching Emma and Ethan ride horses in the corral while Melanie helped Chad's wife prepare dinner. The scene was so perfectly normal, so beautifully peaceful, that it was hard to believe they'd been living in mortal danger just a few months earlier. "Dad," Emma called from her horse, "Uncle Chad says we can come visit the ranch anytime we want." "That's right, sweetheart. And you can visit anytime you want." Ethan rode over to the fence where Glenn was standing. "Dad, are the bad people really gone forever?" Glenn looked at his son, 8 years old, and already showing the kind of thoughtful seriousness that would serve him well in life. "Yes, son. The specific bad people who wanted to hurt our family are gone forever. They're in prison and they're never getting out. But there might be other bad people someday." Glenn considered how to answer that honestly without frightening his child. "There might be, Ethan, but now we know how to protect ourselves, and we have friends who will help us if we ever need it." Ethan nodded solemnly, then brightened. "And you know how to catch the bad people in traps." Glenn laughed. "That's right. I know how to catch bad people in traps." That evening, after the kids were asleep, Glenn and Melanie walked through the ranch's pastures under a sky full of stars that were invisible from their Denver neighborhood. "Glenn," Melanie said quietly, "I've been thinking about what we've been through, and I need to tell you something." "What's that?" "I'm proud of you. Not just for protecting us, but for how you protected us. You could have just run, or hidden, or let the FBI handle everything. Instead, you turned the whole thing around and saved 100 other families in the process." Glenn stopped walking and pulled his wife close. "Melanie, I want you to know something. From the moment I realized our family was in danger, I never doubted that we would survive this. Not because I'm particularly brave or smart, but because I wasn't willing to accept any other outcome." "What do you mean?" "I mean that some things in life are non-negotiable. The safety of my family is one of those things. And anyone who threatens what I'm not willing to lose is going to discover just how dangerous that makes me." Melanie kissed him, and for the first time in months, Glenn felt complete peace. The Coleman family had not just survived their ordeal. They had emerged stronger, closer, and surrounded by new friends who understood the value of protecting what matters most. As they walked back toward the ranch house, Glenn's phone buzzed with a message from their first client in California. "Mr. Coleman, the threats have stopped completely since your team began the investigation. I can't thank you enough for giving me my life back." Glenn smiled. "Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from?" Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Foundation. Marcus Boyle had built his life like he'd built his construction empire, methodically, with careful planning and an unwavering attention to detail. At 45, he commanded respect in both the boardroom and on construction sites across 3 states. His company, Boyle Construction, had grown from a small family business inherited from his father into a multi-million-dollar operation with over 200 employees. The early morning light filtered through the windows of his home office as Marcus reviewed the quarterly reports. His daughter Meredith, 23 and fresh out of college with a business degree, worked the morning shift at a local grocery store while waiting for the right opportunity to join the family business. She had insisted on earning her place rather than accepting a handed position, a decision that filled Marcus with pride. Christy, his wife of 25 years, had been different when they first met. Back then, she was a waitress putting herself through community college, ambitious and driven. Marcus had fallen for her determination as much as her beauty. They'd built their life together, weathering the early struggles of growing a business, celebrating each milestone. But success had changed Christy. As Marcus's wealth grew, so did her appetite for luxury and social status. She transformed into someone who measured worth by designer labels and country club memberships. The woman who once worked double shifts to help fund their first equipment purchase now spent her days at charity luncheons and spa appointments, surrounded by other wealthy wives who viewed life as a competition. Marcus had noticed the changes but attributed them to natural evolution. People grew apart sometimes. Marriages required work. He'd thrown himself deeper into his business, trusting that their foundation was strong enough to weather any storm. That trust was about to be tested. It started with small inconsistencies. Christie's phone face down during dinner. unexplained afternoon absences, new lingerie that never seemed intended for him. Marcus's instincts, honed by years of managing people and reading situations, began to whisper warnings he didn't want to hear. The construction industry had taught Marcus that problems were easier to fix when caught early. Ignoring structural issues only led to catastrophic failure later. So when his wife began exhibiting behavioral changes that made no sense, Marcus did what he did best. He investigated. He didn't hire a private detective. That felt too impersonal, too removed from the situation. Instead, Marcus used skills he developed over decades of business: patience, observation, and the ability to connect seemingly unrelated information into a complete picture. The first concrete evidence came on a Thursday evening. Christy claimed to be meeting her sister Janet for dinner, but Marcus had seen Janet that afternoon at the hardware store, mentioning she was staying in with her sick daughter. A simple lie, but lies in Marcus's world were like cracks in concrete. They spread if left untreated. Marcus began documenting everything with the same precision he used for project management: dates, times, locations, contradictions. He installed a tracking app on the family tablet that Christy often used, positioning it as a security measure after a neighbor's house was burglarized. The pattern emerged quickly. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Christy would create elaborate excuses to meet someone at the Grandview Hotel downtown. She'd arrive at 2 p.m. and leave by 4:30 p.m., plenty of time to create an alibi for her afternoon activities. Marcus drove by the hotel one Tuesday, parking where he could observe the entrance. His chest tightened when he saw Christy exit the elevator at 4:25 p.m., but it was the man who emerged 2 minutes later that turned his blood cold. Hugh Reynolds, Marcus's own project manager, a man he'd hired 3 years ago and trusted with million-dollar contracts. Hugh was married to Frances, a pleasant woman Marcus had met at several company gatherings. They had 2 young children. The betrayal cut deeper than Marcus had anticipated. This wasn't just infidelity. It was a violation by someone he'd brought into his professional family, someone who sat his meetings, shook his hand, and called him boss while sleeping with his wife. That night, Marcus sat in his study long after Christy had gone to bed, staring at the construction photos lining his walls. Each image represented a project built from nothing, carefully planned and executed. His marriage was crumbling, but Marcus Boyle had never walked away from a failing structure without understanding exactly why it fell. He would approach this like any other project that had gone wrong, methodically, thoroughly, and with an eye toward permanent solutions. Chapter 2. The Discovery. Marcus spent the next 2 weeks gathering intelligence with the patience of a master craftsman. He'd learned long ago that rushed work led to poor results, and this situation demanded his absolute best effort. The surveillance revealed disturbing details about the affair's duration and brazenness. Hotel records, obtained through a contact who owed Marcus a favor from a construction project, showed Christy and Hugh had been meeting for 8 months. They'd grown comfortable, careless even, often arriving within minutes of each other. But it was the personal intelligence that truly infuriated Marcus. Christy had been telling Hugh about private family matters, Meredith's job struggles, Marcus's business concerns, even intimate details about their marriage. Hugh, meanwhile, was feeding Christy information about Marcus's work schedule, upcoming projects, and business relationships. They weren't just having an affair. They were conspiring together, treating Marcus's life like their personal entertainment. Christy would laugh about Marcus's boring construction stories, while Hugh shared company gossip and inside information that allowed Christy to manipulate conversations with Marcus's associates. The breaking point came when Marcus discovered they'd been meeting at other locations too. Christy's charity events often coincided with Hugh's site inspections at remote project locations. They'd been using Marcus's own business as cover for their affair, likely laughing about his ignorance while surrounded by the fruits of his labor. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Christy, working late at the charity auction planning. Don't wait up. The timestamp showed 6:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. Marcus knew she was 20 minutes away at the Grandview Hotel with Hugh, probably already naked and mocking the husband who provided her lifestyle. That night, Marcus made two decisions that would change everything. First, he would not confront them directly. That was what emotional people did, and emotion led to mistakes. Second, he would ensure that when this ended, both Christy and Hugh would understand the true cost of betraying Marcus Boyle. Marcus had built his business on the principle that reputation was everything. A contractor who delivered quality work on time would always have customers. But contractors who cut corners, who betrayed trust, who thought they could take advantage of others, they found themselves blacklisted, unemployable, forgotten. Christy and Hugh had made the mistake of thinking Marcus was just another trusting husband, too focused on work to notice what was happening in his own house. They would learn how wrong they were. The plan began forming in Marcus's mind like a blueprint taking shape. Construction projects succeeded because every element was planned, every contingency considered, every outcome predicted. This would be no different. Marcus opened his laptop and began making notes. Timing would be crucial. The company holiday party was scheduled for the following month, an annual event that all employees attended with their spouses. Christy looked forward to it every year, enjoying the opportunity to socialize with Marcus's business associates and their wives. This year's party would be special indeed. Marcus also began thinking about Hugh's position in the company. As project manager, Hugh had access to sensitive information, client relationships, and operational details. He'd been with Boyle Construction for 3 years, long enough to accumulate knowledge that could be valuable to competitors. But Hugh had also made mistakes, small ones that Marcus had overlooked out of loyalty and trust. Scheduling conflicts that cost overtime, supplier relationships that seemed oddly beneficial to certain vendors. Nothing criminal, but patterns that suggested Hugh might be more interested in personal gain than company success. Marcus pulled Hugh's employment file and began reviewing everything with fresh eyes. What had seemed like simple mistakes now looked different when viewed through the lens of betrayal. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the office early and called Meredith. His daughter had been working at Morrison's Grocery for 6 months, gaining real-world experience in customer service and retail management. She'd mentioned wanting to transition into the construction business, but insisted on proving herself first. "Dad, you're calling early. Everything okay? I have a proposition for you," Marcus said. "How would you feel about fast-tracking your entry into the family business?" Meredith's excitement was audible. "Really? I mean, yes, absolutely. I've been hoping you'd consider." "Good. I want you to start immediately as assistant project coordinator. You'll work directly with me on client relationships and operational oversight." "Dad, that's incredible. But what about Hugh? Isn't he the project manager?" Marcus smiled grimly. "Hugh's going to be very busy with other responsibilities soon. I need someone I can trust completely to help me with some upcoming changes." After ending the call, Marcus leaned back in his chair and looked out at the construction yard where his trucks were beginning their daily routes. Each vehicle bore the Boyle Construction logo, a symbol of trust, quality, and family legacy. Christy and Hugh had no idea what they'd unleashed. They thought they were playing games with a simple contractor, too busy with work to notice his wife's wandering eye. They were about to discover that Marcus Boyle was many things, but simple wasn't one of them. The foundation for their destruction was already being laid. Chapter 3: The Revelation. The annual Boyle Construction Holiday Party was held at the Riverside Country Club, the same venue where Marcus and Christy had celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary. The irony wasn't lost on him as he watched his wife prepare for an evening she thought would be another social triumph. Christy had spent hours getting ready, choosing a designer dress that cost more than most people's monthly salary. She'd had her hair done that afternoon at the most expensive salon in town, her nails perfectly manicured, her makeup applied with professional precision. "You look beautiful," Marcus told her as they prepared to leave, and he meant it. Christy was still stunning at 43, still capable of turning heads when she entered a room. That beauty had been one of the first things that attracted him to her. Now, it was just another tool she used to manipulate and deceive. "Thank you, honey," Christy replied, kissing his cheek carefully to avoid smudging her lipstick. "I'm excited to see everyone tonight. Is Hugh bringing Francis?" The casual mention of Hugh's name sent a familiar surge of anger through Marcus but his expression remained pleasant. Of course, all the senior staff will be there with their spouses. During the drive to the country club, Christy chattered about the evening ahead, mentioning several people she hoped to see. She didn't mention Hugh directly again, but Marcus caught her checking her appearance in the visor mirror more frequently than usual. The party was already in full swing when they arrived. The country club's main ballroom was decorated with tasteful holiday arrangements, and the bar was doing steady business among Marcus's employees and their families. Everyone was dressed in their finest, treating the evening as the special occasion it was meant to be. Marcus moved through the crowd with practiced ease, playing the role of gracious host and successful businessman. He introduced Christy to new employees, chatted with longtime workers about their families, and accepted congratulations on another successful year for Boyle Construction. Meredith arrived fashionably late, having insisted on driving herself rather than coming with her parents. Marcus watched his daughter enter the ballroom with quiet pride. She'd inherited Christy's beauty, but combined it with Marcus's confidence and intelligence. At 23, she carried herself with the poise of someone much older. "Everyone, meet our new assistant project coordinator," Marcus announced loudly enough for nearby groups to hear. "My daughter Meredith is joining the family business." The response was overwhelmingly positive. Marcus's employees had watched Meredith grow up, had seen her working at the grocery store, and respected her decision to earn her way into the company rather than simply accepting a nepotism position. Hugh Reynolds approached with Francis, both offering congratulations to Meredith. Hugh's smile seemed forced, and Marcus noticed the way his project manager's eyes kept darting between Meredith and Christy. "Congratulations, Meredith," Hugh said. "I look forward to working with you." "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds," Meredith replied professionally. "Dad's told me great things about your project management skills." Marcus watched the interaction carefully. He was clearly uncomfortable with Meredith's new role, probably wondering how it would affect his own position. Good. Uncertainty was exactly what Marcus wanted Hugh to feel. The evening progressed smoothly until Kevin Wiley, the senior foreman who'd been with Marcus for 15 years, had too much to drink and decided to share his opinions about Meredith's qualifications. "Your daughter is just a cashier," Kevin said loudly enough for several nearby groups to hear. "Why bring her to the company party as if she belongs here?" The comment drew uncomfortable laughter from some of the younger employees, including Hugh, who seemed relieved to have someone else expressing doubts about Meredith's rapid promotion. Even Christy, standing nearby with her wine glass, smiled and nodded approvingly at Kevin's bluntness. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He'd expected some resistance to Meredith's quick advancement, but not public humiliation, and definitely not from his own wife. "She's an embarrassment to your career," Kevin continued, emboldened by the laughter. "You're supposed to hire based on merit, not family connections." Marcus was about to respond when he saw Wes Ferguson, CEO of Ferguson Development and Marcus's biggest client, making his way through the crowd toward their group. Wes was a man Marcus deeply respected, a third-generation businessman who'd built his company into one of the region's most successful development firms. "Marcus," Wes called out, his voice carrying across the room. "I need to borrow you and your daughter for a moment." The crowd quieted as Wes approached. He was well known in the local business community, and his presence at Marcus's company party was both an honor and a surprise. Wes walked directly to Meredith and extended his hand. "Everyone, meet our new junior partner," he announced clearly. "Meredith Boyle has just accepted a position with Ferguson Development as liaison for our construction partnerships." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus felt his own surprise mix with pride as he looked at his daughter, who was handling the announcement with remarkable composure. "I'll be working closely with both Ferguson Development and Boyle Construction," Meredith explained to the stunned crowd. "It's an exciting opportunity to bridge the gap between development and construction management." Marcus quickly understood what had happened. Wes had been recruiting Meredith independently, probably for months. Her position at the grocery store had been temporary. She'd been waiting for the right opportunity, not settling for less. The implications hit Kevin Wiley first. His face went white as he realized he'd just publicly insulted the daughter of his boss, who was also the new business partner of their biggest client. Christie's wine glass trembled in her hand as she processed what had just happened. The daughter she'd been laughing about moments earlier was now in a position that could significantly impact Marcus's business relationships. Hugh Reynolds looked like he might be sick. As project manager, he would be working directly with Meredith in her new role. The woman whose mother he was sleeping with would now have professional oversight of his work. "Sir, I didn't know she was," Kevin stammered, looking desperately at Marcus for some sign of forgiveness. Marcus let the moment stretch, allowing everyone to fully absorb the reversal of fortune they'd just witnessed. His daughter, who they'd been mocking as just a cashier, was now in a position of real power within their professional ecosystem. "Didn't know she was what, Kevin?" Marcus asked quietly. "Qualified, educated, capable of earning opportunities based on her own merit." The party continued around them, but Marcus could feel the shift in atmosphere. People were looking at his family with new eyes, reassessing their assumptions about Meredith and, by extension, about Marcus himself. As the evening wound down, Marcus watched Christie and Hugh from across the room. They were standing with their respective spouses, maintaining the pretense of propriety, but Marcus could see the tension between them. Tonight had complicated their neat little arrangement significantly. Meredith's new position would require her to work closely with Hugh on multiple projects. Christie's social standing among the wives had just been elevated considerably. Meredith was no longer the unemployed daughter, but a young professional with real influence. The affair that had seemed like a private game between Christie and Hugh now had professional implications neither had anticipated. Marcus approached his daughter as the party was ending. "Congratulations," he said sincerely. "When did Wes make the offer?" "3 weeks ago," Meredith replied. "I wanted to tell you, but he asked me to keep it quiet until tonight." He said surprise announcements carry more impact. Marcus smiled genuinely for the first time all evening. His daughter was already thinking like a businesswoman, understanding the value of timing and presentation. "You're going to do excellent work," he told her. "I'm proud of you." As they prepared to leave, Marcus caught Hugh's eye across the room. His project manager was helping Frances with her coat, but his attention was clearly elsewhere. Hugh looked worried, uncertain about how Meredith's new role would affect his own position. He should be worried, Marcus thought. Everything was about to change, and Hugh Reynolds had no idea how dramatically his comfortable little world was about to be disrupted. The foundation was set. Now Marcus could begin building toward his ultimate goal, complete and total justice for the betrayal he'd suffered. Chapter 4. The Manipulation. Marcus arrived at the office the following Monday with a plan that would have impressed his most demanding clients. Like any complex construction project, success would depend on precise timing, careful coordination, and the ability to anticipate every possible complication. Meredith was already at her new desk when Marcus walked in, reviewing project files with the intensity he recognized as a family trait. Her transition from grocery store cashier to construction liaison was seamless. She'd clearly been preparing for this opportunity longer than anyone realized. "Morning, Dad," she said, looking up from a stack of client contracts. "I've been reviewing the Ferguson projects. There are some interesting patterns in the scheduling and cost overruns." Marcus sat down across from her desk. "What kind of patterns?" "Several projects managed by Hugh have experienced similar delays, always for different reasons, but the additional costs seem to benefit the same group of subcontractors." Meredith pointed to specific line items she'd highlighted. "It could be coincidence, but the numbers suggest otherwise." This was exactly what Marcus had hoped for. Meredith's fresh perspective and business education were revealing issues that he'd been too trusting to see clearly. Hugh's betrayal wasn't limited to personal relationships. It extended to professional conduct as well. "I want you to dig deeper into those patterns," Marcus told her. "But quietly. Don't discuss this with anyone else yet." "Of course. What about Hugh? Should I coordinate with him on the current projects?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "Yes, but document everything. Every conversation, every decision, every recommendation he makes. I have a feeling that documentation will become very important." The next phase of Marcus's plan involved reshaping the professional dynamics at Boyle Construction. Hugh's position as project manager had given him significant autonomy, but that was about to change. With Meredith serving as liaison between Ferguson Development and Boyle Construction, Hugh would find himself under much closer scrutiny. Marcus called a meeting for Tuesday morning. The same day, Hugh usually met Christy at the hotel. The timing was deliberate. "I'm implementing new oversight procedures," Marcus announced to his senior staff. "All project decisions above $5,000 will require approval from both project management and our development liaison." Hugh shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "That seems like it could slow down operations significantly." "Efficiency is important," Marcus agreed, "but accuracy is more important. We've had some cost overruns that need to be addressed." Meredith spoke up from her seat at the conference table. "Ferguson Development has expressed concerns about budget predictability. They need more detailed reporting on where delays are occurring and why." Marcus watched Hugh's reaction carefully. His project manager was clearly calculating how these new procedures would affect his schedule and his ability to maintain the patterns Meredith had identified. "I'll need to reschedule some meetings to accommodate the additional oversight," Hugh said carefully. "That's fine," Marcus replied. "We all need to adjust our schedules to serve our clients better." Hugh's face tightened almost imperceptibly. Marcus knew his project manager was thinking about his Tuesday afternoon arrangements with Christy. The new oversight requirements would make it much more difficult for Hugh to disappear for 2-hour periods without explanation. After the meeting, Marcus returned to his office and made a call to his contact at the Grandview Hotel. "I need you to do me another favor," he said. "Starting today, I want to know every time room 237 is booked and by whom." That evening, Marcus casually mentioned to Christy that he'd be working late several nights that week. "New oversight procedures," he explained. "Meredith's role with Ferguson is requiring more detailed reporting." Christy's response was carefully neutral. "That's nice, dear. I might have some evening plans myself. Janet and I are organizing a charity event." Marcus nodded sympathetically. "I hope the charity work goes well. What's the cause this time?" "Children's education," Christy replied without missing a beat. "Very important work." Marcus filed away another lie for his growing collection. Christy's sister Janet volunteered at the animal shelter, not children's charities. More importantly, Marcus had seen Janet that afternoon at the hardware store, and she'd mentioned planning a quiet week at home. The next day, Meredith knocked on Marcus's office door with a concerned expression. "Dad, I think we need to talk about Hugh." Marcus looked up from his desk. "What about him?" "He missed a scheduled site inspection yesterday afternoon. Told the client he had a family emergency, but I saw Frances at the grocery store during lunch, and she seemed fine. She mentioned Hugh was at work." Marcus felt a familiar surge of anger, but kept his voice level. "What time was the missed inspection?" 2:30. The client had to reschedule, which pushed back their timeline by 2 days. "It's the third time this month Hugh's had a family emergency on Tuesday afternoons." Marcus made a note in his calendar. Hugh's pattern was becoming more obvious as Meredith's oversight increased. The project manager was struggling to maintain his professional responsibilities while keeping his personal appointment schedule. "I'll speak with Hugh about the missed inspection," Marcus told his daughter. "In the meantime, I want you to start attending client meetings as our company representative. If Hugh can't maintain his schedule reliability, we need backup coverage." Meredith nodded seriously. "I've already started building relationships with the key clients. Most of them seem pleased to have additional company attention." That afternoon, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from his hotel contact. "Room 237 booked 2 to 4 p.m. today. Guest name, H. Reynolds." Marcus smiled grimly. Hugh was still keeping his appointments with Christy, but the increased pressure at work was making it harder for him to maintain the facade of professionalism. The plan was working exactly as Marcus had hoped. Hugh was being forced to choose between his professional responsibilities and his personal indulgences, and he was consistently choosing the affair over his job performance. Meanwhile, Christy was finding herself in an increasingly complicated social position. Meredith's success with Ferguson Development had elevated the family's standing in the business community, making it harder for Christy to maintain her casual dismissiveness of her daughter's achievements. At the country club that week, Christy found herself fielding congratulations about Meredith's new position. The same women who had barely acknowledged her daughter's existence were now asking for introductions and networking opportunities. Marcus watched his wife navigate these conversations with growing discomfort. Christy had built her social identity around being the successful businessman's wife, but now she was also the mother of an up-and-coming young professional. The cognitive dissonance was clearly wearing on her. But more importantly, Christy was finding it harder to create believable excuses for her afternoon absences. Her social circle was smaller and more interconnected than she'd realized. When she claimed to be with one person, there was always someone else who had seen that person elsewhere. Marcus began subtly increasing the pressure by scheduling more family obligations during Christy's usual affair hours. Business dinners that required her presence. Charity events that she couldn't refuse without seeming unsupportive. Each scheduling conflict forced Christy to choose between maintaining her social obligations and keeping her appointment with Hugh. And each choice created more stress, more lies, more opportunities for mistakes. The foundation of their deception was beginning to show cracks, and Marcus was just getting started. Chapter 5. The Trap. Marcus's next move came disguised as a generous gesture toward his employees. He announced that Boyle Construction would be sponsoring a weekend retreat for senior staff and their families at Lake Morrison, a popular resort about 2 hours from town. Team building is important, Marcus explained to the group gathered in the conference room. We've had a successful year, and I want everyone to relax and enjoy some time together. The retreat was scheduled for the second weekend in December, giving everyone 3 weeks to arrange their schedules. Marcus made it clear that attendance was strongly encouraged but not mandatory, creating exactly the dynamic he wanted. Hugh shifted in his seat as Marcus outlined the weekend plans. Will this conflict with any ongoing projects? He asked. Nothing that can't be managed, Marcus replied. I'm sure everyone can arrange their personal schedules to accommodate a company retreat. After the meeting, Marcus watched Hugh's behavior carefully. His project manager seemed agitated, frequently checking his phone and making hushed calls from his office. Marcus's hotel contact had already confirmed that Hugh was trying to book additional rooms at the Grand View for the weekend of the retreat, apparently planning to maintain his affair schedule even during company time. The beautiful part of Marcus's plan was its apparent generosity. Who could object to a company-sponsored weekend at a luxury resort? Hugh couldn't refuse without seeming ungrateful, but accepting meant disrupting his carefully planned affair schedule. Marcus also made sure that Frances Reynolds received a personal invitation. He called her directly, emphasizing how much Christy was looking forward to spending time with the other wives. It'll be wonderful, Marcus told Frances over the phone. Christy's been talking about getting to know everyone better. She's especially excited about having quality time with you and Hugh. Frances seemed genuinely pleased by the invitation. Hugh's been working so hard lately, she said. He needs a break. Sometimes I worry that he's taking on too much stress. Marcus felt a moment of sympathy for Frances, who clearly had no idea what kind of stress her husband was actually managing. But sympathy was a luxury Marcus couldn't afford. Hugh had made his choices, and Frances was unfortunately positioned to become collateral damage. That evening, Marcus overheard Christy on the phone in their bedroom. Her voice was lower than usual, but he caught enough to understand she was speaking with Hugh about the retreat. We can't just skip it, Christy was saying. Marcus made it clear that everyone's expected to attend. It would look suspicious if we both had excuses. Marcus couldn't hear Hugh's response, but Christy's reply was clear. Then we'll have to be careful. Maybe we can find time during the weekend activities. Marcus smiled to himself. Christy and Hugh thought they were being clever, planning to continue their affair even under his nose at a company retreat. They had no idea they were walking directly into the most elaborate trap Marcus had ever constructed. The next phase involved leveraging Meredith's position with Ferguson Development. Marcus asked his daughter to invite Wes Ferguson to join them for Saturday evening's dinner at the retreat. Wes and his wife would be excellent additions to the weekend, Marcus explained. It'll strengthen our business relationship, and the other employees would enjoy meeting them. Meredith agreed enthusiastically. That's a great idea. Wes has been very supportive of my transition, and Linda is lovely. I'll call them today. Marcus knew that having the Ferguson family at the retreat would make it impossible for Christy and Hugh to maintain their casual dismissiveness of Meredith's achievements. They would be forced to play their roles as supportive family member and loyal employee while surrounded by people who could advance or destroy their social and professional standings. Meanwhile, Marcus had been having private conversations with Kevin Wiley, the foreman who had embarrassed himself at the holiday party. Kevin was desperate to make amends for his public criticism of Meredith, and Marcus was happy to provide opportunities for redemption. I need someone I can trust to help coordinate the retreat activities, Marcus told Kevin. Someone who understands the importance of team unity and family support. Kevin nodded eagerly. You can count on me, Marcus. I want to make things right after what happened at the party. Good. I'll be assigning you to work closely with Meredith on the weekend logistics. Follow her lead and make sure everything runs smoothly. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. Kevin, who had publicly called Meredith an embarrassment, would now be taking orders from her and working to ensure her success. The power dynamics at Boyle Construction were shifting dramatically, and everyone was being forced to adapt. Marcus also made sure that the retreat activities would require close collaboration between staff members and their spouses. Team-building exercises, group dinners, and scheduled social events that would make it almost impossible for Christy and Hugh to find private time together. But Marcus's most brilliant stroke was the surprise he planned for Saturday night's dinner. He'd arranged for a local photographer to document the retreat, ostensibly for the company newsletter and website. What Christy and Hugh didn't know was that the photographer would be taking pictures throughout the weekend, creating a permanent record of who was where and when. Any attempt by Christy and Hugh to sneak away together would be documented, time-stamped, and preserved for future use. 3 days before the retreat, Marcus received a call from his hotel contact with interesting news. Hugh had called to cancel his regular Tuesday reservation, claiming he would be out of town for business. But Hugh had also made several inquiries about other hotels near Lake Morrison. Marcus realized that Hugh was planning to extend his affair to the retreat location, probably hoping to book a separate room where he and Christy could meet without detection. The arrogance was breathtaking. Hugh actually thought he could continue his betrayal while attending a company event as Marcus's employee. That evening, Marcus made a call to the Lake Morrison Resort. As the person booking the corporate retreat, he had certain privileges regarding room assignments and guest policies. I need to make sure all of my employees are accounted for throughout the weekend, Marcus explained to the resort manager. For insurance purposes, I'll need a record of all guests and rooms paid for by my company, and I'll need to be notified of any additional bookings made by my employees. The manager was happy to accommodate such a large group booking. Marcus would know immediately if Hugh tried to book an additional room at the resort. By Friday evening, everything was in place. The transportation was arranged, the activities were planned, and the stage was set for Christy and Hugh to destroy themselves publicly and professionally. Marcus packed his weekend bag with the satisfaction of a general preparing for a battle he'd already won. Christy and Hugh thought they were attending a pleasant company retreat. They had no idea they were walking into the most sophisticated trap Marcus had ever constructed. The weekend at Lake Morrison would end their affair permanently, but not in the way they expected. Chapter 6. The Confrontation. The weekend retreat began exactly as Marcus had planned. 2 chartered buses transported the Boyle Construction families to Lake Morrison Resort on Friday afternoon, with everyone settling into their rooms and gathering for dinner by evening. The atmosphere was festive and relaxed, precisely the opposite of what Marcus felt as he watched Christy and Hugh maintain their careful distance while their eyes searched for opportunities. Marcus had arranged the room assignment strategically. Christy shared a room with him, naturally, while Hugh was roomed with Francis. But more importantly, Marcus had positioned Meredith and Kevin Wiley in the room directly between the Boyle and Reynolds families. Any midnight wandering would require passing directly by people who would notice. Saturday's activities kept everyone busy from morning until late evening. Team building exercises, a group hike around the lake, and coordinated games that required family participation. Marcus watched with grim satisfaction as Christy and Hugh grew increasingly frustrated by their inability to find private time together. Frances Reynolds seemed to be enjoying herself immensely, commenting several times about how nice it was to have Hugh's undivided attention for once. "He's been so distracted lately," she told Christy during the afternoon activities. "Always checking his phone and making mysterious calls. I'm glad he's finally relaxing." Christy's smile in response looked painful. The Saturday evening dinner was Marcus's masterpiece. Wes and Linda Ferguson arrived as planned, bringing an air of importance to the gathering that elevated everyone's behavior. The photographer Marcus had hired work discreetly throughout the evening, capturing candid moments of the various families interacting. Marcus had arranged for himself to be seated between Wes Ferguson and Hugh Reynolds, ensuring that Hugh couldn't escape or avoid participating in the conversation. Christy found herself positioned with Linda Ferguson and Frances Reynolds, forced to maintain pleasant conversation with both her lover's wife and her husband's most important client. "Your daughter is remarkable," Linda Ferguson told Christy during dinner. "Wes says she has excellent instincts for business development." "Thank you," Christy replied, her voice tight. "We're very proud of her." "I'm sure you are. It must be wonderful to see her succeeding in such a competitive field." Hugh tells us she's been very effective in her oversight role. Marcus watched Christy's reaction to Linda's innocent comment. The reminder that Meredith now had professional authority over Hugh was clearly painful for Christy to contemplate. Hugh, meanwhile, was struggling with his own conversation. Wes Ferguson was asking detailed questions about project management and cost control, exactly the areas where Hugh's performance had been questionable since his affair began. "Marcus tells me you've been having some scheduling challenges," Wes mentioned casually. "How do you balance multiple project deadlines with unexpected complications?" Hugh's response was unconvincing, filled with vague references to industry challenges and client demands. Marcus could see Wes growing less impressed with each inadequate answer. After dinner, Marcus made his announcement. "I have a surprise for everyone," he said, standing and raising his wine glass. "Next month, Boyle Construction will be bidding on the largest project in our company's history. Ferguson Development has invited us to submit a proposal for their new residential complex, a $50 million project that would require a 3-year commitment." The room erupted in excited conversation. A project of that magnitude would transform Boyle Construction from a regional company into a major player in the industry. "The project will require our absolute best work," Marcus continued. "I'll be personally overseeing every aspect, working directly with our liaison Meredith and our project management team to ensure perfect execution." Hugh's face had gone pale. A project of that scope would require constant oversight, detailed reporting, and absolutely reliable scheduling. There would be no room for the kind of unprofessional behavior he'd been exhibiting. Marcus let the congratulations and excited chatter continue for several minutes before delivering his final surprise. "The photographer tonight has been documenting our celebration because this weekend represents a turning point for our company. These pictures will be featured in our proposal to Ferguson Development, showing the strong family atmosphere and team unity that makes Boyle Construction special." Christy's wine glass trembled in her hand. He looked like he might be sick. The idea that their behavior throughout the weekend had been photographed and would be presented to clients was clearly terrifying to both of them. But Marcus wasn't finished. "In fact, I'd like everyone to gather for a group photo right now. This moment deserves to be preserved." As everyone assembled for the photograph, Marcus positioned himself between Christy and Hugh, with their respective spouses on the outside. Meredith stood proudly next to Wes Ferguson, representing the new generation of the family business. The photographer took multiple shots, ensuring that everyone's face was clearly visible and properly documented. Marcus made sure that both Christy and Hugh were looking directly at the camera, their discomfort barely concealed behind forced smiles. After the photo session, people began drifting toward their rooms. Marcus caught Hugh's eye and gestured toward the resort bar. "How about nightcap? We should discuss the staffing requirements for the Ferguson project. Hugh couldn't refuse without seeming unprofessional, especially with Wes Ferguson still in the building. He followed Marcus to the bar, leaving Christy to walk back to the rooms with Francis and the other wives. Marcus ordered 2 whiskeys and got straight to the point. I need to know I can count on you for this project, Hugh. $50 million doesn't allow for scheduling conflicts or family emergencies. Hugh took a large gulp of his whiskey. Of course you can count on me. I'm completely committed to the company's success. Good, because there have been some concerns about your reliability lately. Missing client meetings, scheduling conflicts, distracted behavior. I need to know that's behind us. Hugh's jaw tightened. What exactly are you implying? Marcus smiled coldly. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating directly that your performance has declined, and I need to understand why. The 2 men stared at each other across the small table. Hugh was calculating how much Marcus might know, while Marcus was enjoying watching his employee squirm under pressure. Personal issues can affect professional performance, Marcus continued. If you're dealing with something that's impacting your work, now would be the time to address it honestly. Hugh finished his whiskey in one gulp. There are no personal issues affecting my work. Excellent. Then I can expect perfect reliability moving forward. No missed meetings, no mysterious appointments, no unexplained absences. Hugh nodded stiffly. Absolutely. Marcus raised his glass in a mock toast. To the Ferguson project, and to the absolute trust and loyalty that makes success possible. Hugh clinked his glass against Marcus's, but his hand was shaking slightly. As they walked back toward the rooms, Marcus delivered his final message. By the way, Hugh, I've decided that all senior staff will be required to provide detailed daily schedules for the duration of the Ferguson project. Client oversight demands complete transparency about where our team members are and what they're working on. Hugh stopped walking. Daily schedules? Hourly, actually. Ferguson Development needs to know that their $50 million investment is being managed with absolute precision. Marcus continued walking toward his room, leaving Hugh standing in the hallway. Through the window, Marcus could see Christy pacing in their room, clearly waiting for news about what had transpired during the bar conversation. As Marcus prepared for bed, he reflected on the weekend success. Christy and Hugh were now trapped between their desire to continue their affair and the crushing pressure of professional scrutiny. The Ferguson project made it impossible for Hugh to maintain his irresponsible behavior, while the photography and documentation made it dangerous for either of them to risk exposure. But most importantly, Marcus had established a new dynamic where he controlled every aspect of their professional and social environments. Christy and Hugh were no longer playing a private game. They were performing under constant observation, with their reputations and livelihoods hanging in the balance. The trap was set and ready to spring. All that remained was waiting for Christy and Hugh to make the inevitable mistake that would destroy them completely. Chapter 7. The Pressure. The weeks following the retreat brought exactly the pressure Marcus had anticipated. Hugh's new daily reporting requirements made his affair schedule nearly impossible to maintain, while Christy found herself under increased social scrutiny as the mother of Ferguson Development's rising star. Marcus watched with satisfaction as both his wife and employees struggled to adapt to their new reality. Hugh's hourly schedules were submitted each morning and cross-referenced against actual activities throughout the day. Any discrepancy required explanation and documentation. Your 2 p.m. site inspection was rescheduled, Meredith mentioned to Hugh during a Monday morning meeting. The client said you called with a family emergency. Is everything all right with Francis and the kids? Hugh's face flushed. Just a minor issue. Everything's resolved now. I'm glad to hear that, Marcus interjected. But we'll need to implement a backup system for emergencies. Client relationships are too important to risk disruption. Meredith nodded approvingly. I could serve as backup for any emergency situations. It would ensure continuity of service. Hugh looked trapped. Having Meredith as backup meant that any future emergencies would require her involvement, making his lives much harder to maintain. Meanwhile, Christy was discovering that her elevated social position came with uncomfortable obligations. Linda Ferguson had invited her to join the board of the Children's Education Foundation, a legitimate charity that required actual time commitment and public involvement. "It's such an honor," Linda explained over lunch at the country club. "With Meredith's success and your family's growing influence in the business community, your voice would be valuable in our fundraising efforts." Christy accepted the position because refusing would have seemed ungrateful, but the irony was painful. She was now committed to supporting children's education, while her affair was conducted during hours she claimed to be doing charity work. Marcus began receiving reports from his hotel contact that painted a clear picture of growing desperation. He had tried to book rooms at 3 different hotels, always for Tuesday and Thursday afternoon blocks. But each attempt was canceled within hours, usually after frantic phone calls from Christy about scheduling conflicts. The strain was beginning to show in both their public and private behavior. Christy had become short-tempered at home, snapping at Marcus over minor issues and spending more time locked in the bathroom, making hushed phone calls. Hugh was making mistakes at work, missing details, and submitting reports with obvious errors. "I'm concerned about Hugh's performance," Meredith mentioned to Marcus during one of their private meetings. "His project oversight has become sloppy, and he seems distracted during client presentations." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "What do you recommend?" "Additional oversight at minimum. Maybe we should consider bringing in an assistant project manager to help with the workload." "Interesting suggestion. Do you have someone in mind?" Meredith smiled. "Actually, Kevin Wiley has been asking about advancement opportunities. His work at the retreat was excellent, and he's been very supportive of the new quality control measures." Marcus nodded approvingly. Kevin's transformation from Meredith's critic to her advocate had been remarkable to watch. The foreman was so eager to make amends for his holiday party behavior that he'd become one of Meredith's most loyal supporters. "Set up a meeting with Kevin," Marcus told his daughter. "If he's interested in project management training, we'll consider adding him to the team." The next day, Marcus called Hugh into his office for a performance review meeting. The timing was deliberate, Tuesday afternoon, exactly when Hugh would normally be meeting Christy at whatever hotel they'd managed to book. "I've been reviewing your recent work," Marcus began, spreading project files across his desk. "There are some patterns that concern me." Hugh shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "What kind of patterns?" "Inconsistent attention to detail, scheduling irregularities, client complaints about communication gaps." Marcus looked up from the files. "Help me understand what's causing these issues." Hugh's eyes darted toward the clock on Marcus's wall. It was 1:45 p.m., 15 minutes before his usual meeting time with Christy. "I think you might be seeing problems that don't exist," Hugh said defensively. "My project completion rate is still above company average." "Completion rate isn't the only metric that matters," Marcus replied. "Client satisfaction, cost control, team coordination, all of these have shown decline over the past several months." Hugh's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it quickly, and Marcus caught the flash of panic in his eyes. "Is that urgent?" Marcus asked innocently. "No, just routine business." "Good, because this conversation is important." Marcus leaned forward in his chair. "Hugh, I need to know if there's something affecting your ability to maintain professional standards. Health issues, family problems, personal stress, anything that might explain the performance decline." Hugh's phone buzzed again. This time he ignored it, but Marcus could see the effort it required. "There's nothing affecting my work performance," Hugh said firmly. "I hope that's true," Marcus replied. "Because the Ferguson project requires absolute reliability. $50 million doesn't allow for distracted employees or inconsistent performance." The meeting continued for another hour, with Marcus asking detailed questions about specific projects and timelines. Hugh's answers became increasingly strained as his phone continued to buzz with what Marcus assumed were increasingly frantic messages from Christy. When the meeting finally ended, Hugh rushed from the office without his usual pleasantries. Marcus watched through his window as Hugh hurried to his car, phone pressed to his ear. That evening, Christy was unusually quiet during dinner. She picked at her food and responded to Marcus's conversation with distracted one-word answers. "Everything all right?" Marcus asked. "You seem troubled about something." Christy looked up sharply. "I'm fine, just tired from a charity work." How's the Children's Education Foundation Board? Linda Ferguson speaks very highly of your commitment. It's fine. Busy. Lots of meetings and planning sessions. Marcus nodded sympathetically. I imagine it's challenging to balance charity work with your other social obligations. When's your next board meeting? Christie's pause was almost imperceptible. Thursday afternoon. We're planning a fundraiser for next month. Marcus made a mental note. Thursday afternoon was one of Hugh's traditional affair slots. Either Christie was lying about the board meeting, or she and Hugh had been forced to find yet another time to meet. The next morning, Marcus called Linda Ferguson directly. I wanted to thank you for including Christie on the foundation board, he said. She's been very excited about the work. Actually, Linda replied, we haven't had a board meeting since last month. Christie mentioned she needed to miss Thursday's meeting for a family obligation. We rescheduled for next week. Marcus felt the familiar surge of anger at Christie's casual lies, but his voice remained pleasant. I must have misunderstood her schedule. Thank you for being flexible with her availability. After ending the call, Marcus sat back in his chair and considered his next move. Christie and Hugh were becoming increasingly desperate, making more mistakes and taking greater risks to maintain their affair. The pressure was working exactly as intended. But Marcus wanted more than just inconvenience and stress. He wanted complete destruction of their comfortable deception, and he was beginning to see exactly how to achieve it. The final trap would require perfect timing and absolute precision. But when it sprung, Christie and Hugh would lose everything they valued: their reputations, their relationships, and their ability to ever feel secure again. Marcus opened his laptop and began making detailed plans for the endgame. Chapter 8. The Unraveling. Marcus's final strategy required patience and the kind of meticulous planning that had made his construction business successful. He would create a situation where Christie and Hugh's desperation would force them into a public mistake they couldn't explain away. The opportunity came when Ferguson Development announced an unexpected change to their timeline. Wes Ferguson called Marcus directly with the news. We're moving up the residential complex project by 3 months, Wes explained. Market conditions are favorable, and we want to break ground in early spring. Can Boyle Construction handle an accelerated schedule? Marcus didn't hesitate. Absolutely. We'll make whatever adjustments are necessary to meet your timeline. This acceleration meant that Hugh's performance issues could no longer be overlooked or managed quietly. The project would require flawless execution, with no room for the kinds of mistakes and distractions that had been plaguing Hugh's work. Marcus called an emergency meeting for Thursday afternoon, prime affair time for Christie and Hugh. All senior staff were required to attend, with no exceptions allowed for personal obligations. Ferguson Development has advanced our timeline significantly, Marcus announced to the assembled team. This is the opportunity of a lifetime for our company, but it requires absolute commitment from everyone. Hugh sat rigidly in his chair, his phone buzzing constantly with what Marcus assumed were increasingly frantic messages from Christie. The project manager's face showed the strain of choosing between professional obligations and personal desires. Effective immediately, we're implementing a new management structure, Marcus continued. Kevin Wiley will be promoted to assistant project manager, working directly with Hugh to ensure seamless execution of all project elements. Kevin beamed with pride, while Hugh's expression grew more strained. Having Kevin as his assistant meant that Hugh's activities would be under constant scrutiny by someone eager to prove himself worthy of the promotion. Additionally, Marcus said, all project managers will be required to maintain shared digital calendars, accessible to the entire management team. Transparency and coordination are essential for a project of this magnitude. Hugh's phone buzzed again. This time he silenced it completely, but Marcus could see the panic in his eyes. Shared calendars meant that every meeting, every appointment, every absence would be visible to the entire team. Meredith spoke up from her seat at the conference table. I'll be implementing weekly progress reviews with Ferguson Development. They want detailed reports on resource allocation and timeline adherence. Excellent, Marcus said. Hugh, you'll coordinate directly with Meredith to ensure our reporting meets Ferguson standards. After the meeting, Marcus watched Hugh hurry from the building, phone pressed to his ear. The project manager was clearly trying to salvage whatever arrangement he'd made with Christy for that afternoon. But Marcus's real masterstroke was still to come. That evening, Marcus made two important phone calls. The first was to Francis Reynolds. "Francis, I wanted to let you know that Hugh will be working much longer hours over the next few months," Marcus explained. "The Ferguson project requires extensive overtime, and I wanted to make sure you were prepared for his increased schedule." Francis seemed grateful for the consideration. "Thank you for calling, Marcus. Hugh's been so stressed lately, working late almost every day. I was beginning to worry that something was wrong." "Construction deadlines can be challenging," Marcus replied sympathetically. "But this project will establish Hugh's reputation in the industry. The long hours will be worth it." The second call was to Christy's sister Janet. "I'm planning a surprise for Christy," Marcus told Janet. "She's been working so hard with her charity obligations that I want to do something special for her. Could you help me coordinate a surprise lunch next week?" Janet was enthusiastic about the idea. "That's so thoughtful. Christy's been mentioning how busy she's been with the Children's Education Foundation. She deserves some recognition for all her volunteer work." Marcus suggested Thursday afternoon for the surprise lunch, knowing it would conflict with any affair plans Christy might be making. "I'll tell her it's a business lunch with Ferguson development spouses. She'll feel obligated to attend." "Perfect. I'll make reservations somewhere nice and invite a few of her other friends. She'll be so surprised." Marcus smiled as he ended the call. Christy would indeed be surprised, but not in the way Janet imagined. The next week unfolded exactly as Marcus had planned. Hugh's shared calendar showed a suspicious gap on Thursday afternoon marked only as site inspection, while Christy had already begun making excuses about her busy charity schedule. "I might be late for dinner Thursday," Christy mentioned casually on Wednesday evening. "The foundation board has an emergency meeting about the fundraiser." Marcus nodded sympathetically. "Actually, that works out perfectly. Linda Ferguson invited you to a special lunch with the development spouses. It's at 1 p.m. at the Riverside restaurant. She specifically asked me to make sure you attended." Christy's face went white. I'm not sure I can make it." "The board meeting. Linda will be disappointed if you skip her lunch for another obligation," Marcus said firmly. "Your relationship with the Ferguson family is important for Meredith's career." Christy was trapped. She couldn't refuse Linda Ferguson's invitation without seeming ungrateful, but accepting meant missing her Thursday afternoon appointment with Hugh. Thursday morning arrived with unseasonably warm weather, perfect for Marcus's final surprise. He'd arranged for Kevin Wiley to accompany Hugh on his afternoon site inspection, claiming that the new assistant project manager needed hands-on experience with client relations. "I appreciate the opportunity," Kevin told Hugh enthusiastically. "I want to learn everything about your project management techniques." Hugh looked physically ill. "Actually, today's inspection is fairly routine. Maybe we should start your training with something more complex." "Nonsense," Marcus interjected. "Kevin needs to see how you handle all aspects of the job. Take him along to everything." At exactly 1 p.m., Christy arrived at the Riverside restaurant to find Janet and 3 other friends waiting with balloons and a small cake. The surprise lunch was real, complete with photographers Janet had hired to document Christy's reaction. "Surprise!" Janet called out as Christy entered the restaurant. "Marcus wanted to celebrate all your charity work." Christy's smile looked painted on as she accepted congratulations and posed for pictures that would be shared across social media within hours. Meanwhile, Hugh was frantically trying to escape Kevin's enthusiastic companionship. "I need to check on another site quickly," Hugh told Kevin around 2 p.m. "Why don't you head back to the office?" Kevin shook his head. "Marcus said to stick with you all afternoon. I don't want to disappoint him on my first week as assistant manager." Hugh's phone had been buzzing constantly throughout the day. Christy's messages were becoming increasingly desperate as she realized she was trapped at the surprise lunch with no way to meet Hugh privately. By 3 p.m., both Christy and Hugh were in full panic mode. Christy was still smiling for photographs at the restaurant while texting frantically under the table. Hugh was making excuses to check his phone every few minutes, claiming to be coordinating with subcontractors. "Is everything all right?" Kevin asked Hugh. "You seem distracted." Just normal project stress, Hugh replied, but his hand was shaking as he scrolled through Christie's messages. At 4 p.m., Christie finally escaped the lunch by claiming a family emergency. She drove directly to the Grandview Hotel, hoping to salvage what remained of her affair appointment. But Hugh was still trapped with Kevin, who was enthusiastically documenting every aspect of their afternoon activities. Christie sat in the hotel parking lot for 30 minutes, calling Hugh repeatedly. His phone went straight to voicemail each time. Kevin's presence made it impossible for Hugh to answer personal calls. Finally, Christie drove home in frustrated defeat. For the first time in 8 months, she and Hugh had been completely prevented from meeting. The carefully constructed lies and elaborate scheduling that had protected their affair had finally collapsed under the weight of Marcus's pressure. That evening, Marcus watched Christie struggle to maintain her composure during dinner. She was clearly agitated, jumping every time her phone buzzed and barely touching her food. "How was the surprise lunch?" Marcus asked innocently. "Janet said you seemed overwhelmed by everyone's appreciation for your charity work." "It was lovely," Christie replied through gritted teeth. "Very thoughtful of you to arrange it. I have the pictures Janet sent," Marcus said, pulling out his phone. "You look beautiful in every one. The local newspaper wants to run a story about your foundation work using these photos." Christie's fork clattered against her plate. Public recognition of her charity work would make it even harder to create believable excuses for her afternoon absences. Marcus smiled as he showed Christie the photographs. In every image, she looked trapped and miserable despite her forced smile. The pictures perfectly captured the moment when Christie realized that her comfortable deception was finally crumbling. The endgame was approaching, and Marcus held all the cards. Chapter 9. The Reckoning. Marcus waited exactly 1 week before springing his final trap. He scheduled a mandatory company meeting for Thursday afternoon, requiring all senior staff and their spouses to attend a special announcement regarding the Ferguson project. The meeting was held in the main conference room at Boyle Construction, with coffee and pastries arranged to suggest a celebration. Marcus had invited Wes and Linda Ferguson as special guests, giving the gathering an air of importance that made attendance absolutely mandatory. Christie arrived looking haggard and nervous. She'd been struggling all week to reschedule her affair meetings with Hugh, but Marcus's increased oversight and Kevin's constant presence had made private time impossible. The strain was showing in her appearance and demeanor. Hugh entered the conference room looking equally desperate. His shared calendar showed increasingly erratic scheduling as he tried to find windows of opportunity that no longer existed. Kevin Wiley followed him closely, maintaining the enthusiastic oversight that had become his trademark since the promotion. "Thank you all for coming," Marcus began, standing at the head of the conference table. "I have several important announcements that will affect everyone here." Marcus gestured toward a display board he'd set up near the windows. "First, I'm pleased to announce that Ferguson Development has formally selected Boyle Construction as the primary contractor for their residential complex." The contract was signed this morning. The room erupted in applause and congratulations. This was genuinely exciting news that would transform the company's future. But Marcus wasn't finished. "Second, I want to recognize the exceptional work of our assistant project coordinator." Marcus smiled at Meredith, who was seated between Wes and Linda Ferguson. Meredith's oversight and quality control measures have been instrumental in securing this contract. More applause followed, with several employees expressing their appreciation for Meredith's contribution. Hugh clapped mechanically, his face showing the strain of maintaining professional composure. Finally, Marcus said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "I need to address some performance issues that have come to my attention." The room fell silent. This was unexpected, and everyone could sense the shift in atmosphere. Marcus walked to his laptop and connected it to the room's display screen. "Over the past several months, I've been documenting irregularities in our project management systems. Missed appointments, unauthorized schedule changes, and pattern discrepancies that affect our client relationships." Hugh's face had gone completely white. He knew what was coming, but was powerless to stop it. These issues appear to be centered around one individual whose personal priorities have begun affecting professional performance. Marcus clicked to display Hugh's calendar on the screen. Let me show you what I've discovered. The calendar revealed everything. Weeks of family emergencies that coincided with missed client meetings. Site inspections that never appeared in the actual project logs. Scheduling gaps that aligned perfectly with Christie's charity meetings. Hugh, Marcus said quietly, would you like to explain these discrepancies? Hugh stood frozen, unable to speak. Frances looked confused, staring at the calendar display and trying to understand what she was seeing. Christie started to rise from her chair, but Marcus gestured for her to remain seated. We're not finished yet. Marcus clicked to the next screen, displaying hotel records he'd obtained through his contact. These are documentation records from the Grandview Hotel, showing regular bookings by Hugh Reynolds, always during scheduled work hours. Frances gasped audibly. The room was completely silent, except for the sound of her sharp intake of breath. Mrs. Reynolds, Marcus said gently, I'm sorry you had to learn about this in such a public setting, but the impact on our business operations made a public discussion necessary. Frances looked at Hugh with dawning horror. You've been at a hotel during work hours? Hugh tried to speak, but no words came out. His career, his marriage, and his reputation were disintegrating simultaneously in front of everyone he worked with. But Marcus had saved the most devastating revelation for last. There's one more piece of information that explains these scheduling patterns, Marcus said, clicking to the final screen. The display showed a detailed timeline matching Hugh's hotel visits with Christie's claimed charity activities. Every date, every time, every lie was laid out in perfect parallel columns. My wife has been Hugh's companion during these hotel visits, Marcus announced calmly. They've been conducting an affair for 8 months, using company time and family resources to maintain their deception. The silence that followed was deafening. Christie sat frozen in her chair, her face a mask of horror and humiliation. Hugh had collapsed back into his seat, his head in his hands. Frances Reynolds began crying quietly. Linda Ferguson reached over to comfort her, while Wes stared at Hugh with undisguised disgust. Christie, Marcus said, turning toward his wife, do you have anything to say in your defense? Christie's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words emerged. She looked around the room at the faces staring back at her, colleagues, friends, business associates, all witnessing her complete humiliation. I thought not, Marcus said. He walked back to the head of the table and addressed the room. Effective immediately, Hugh Reynolds is terminated from Boyle Construction. All projects under his management will be transferred to Kevin Wiley and Meredith Boyle. Hugh finally found his voice. Marcus, please. I know I made mistakes, but... Mistakes? Marcus interrupted. You betrayed my trust, damaged my family, and compromised our business relationships. There are no second chances for that level of betrayal. Marcus turned toward Christie. As for my wife, our marriage is over. Christie will be moving out of our family home immediately. Our attorneys will handle the divorce proceedings. Christie finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. Marcus, I can explain. There's nothing to explain, Marcus replied coldly. You made your choices. Now you'll live with the consequences. Wes Ferguson stood up slowly. Marcus, I want you to know that Ferguson Development's confidence in Boyle Construction remains unchanged. Your handling of this situation demonstrates exactly the kind of integrity and leadership we value in our business partners. Marcus nodded gratefully. Thank you, Wes. I promise you that our personal difficulties will not affect our professional commitment to your projects. Linda Ferguson helped Frances Reynolds to her feet. Come on, honey, let's get you home. As people began filing out of the conference room, Marcus remained standing at the head of the table. Hugh and Christie sat in their chairs like broken dolls, unable to move or speak. Kevin Wiley approached Marcus with obvious concern. Sir, what do you need me to do about the project transitions? Handle everything exactly as you've been trained, Marcus replied. You've earned this promotion through your excellent work. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Kevin nodded firmly and left the room. Within minutes, only Marcus, Christie, and Hugh remained. You planned this, Christy whispered. You knew all along. Marcus looked at his wife with complete coldness. I knew from the first week. Everything that happened afterward was your choice. You could have stopped at any time, but you chose to continue lying and deceiving. Hugh finally raised his head. What about my family? Francis and the kids don't deserve. You should have considered your family before you decided to betray them. Marcus interrupted. Your children will grow up knowing that their father chose selfishness over integrity. Marcus walked toward the door, then turned back for his final words. You both made the mistake of thinking I was too trusting or too busy to notice what you were doing. You forgot that I built this company by paying attention to details and never accepting anything less than complete reliability. He paused, letting his words sink in. You wanted to play games with my life and my family. I played games with yours. The difference is that I won. Marcus left the conference room and walked to his office, where Meredith was waiting with a concerned expression. Dad, are you okay? She asked. Marcus looked at his daughter, bright, honest, hard-working, everything he'd hoped she would become. I'm better than okay, he said. I'm free. 3 months later, Boyle Construction broke ground on the Ferguson Development residential complex. The project was completed ahead of schedule and under budget, earning the company recognition as the region's premier construction firm. Christy moved to another state, finding work as a receptionist at a small medical practice. The divorce settlement left her with enough money to survive, but not enough to maintain the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to. Hugh Reynolds never found another job in construction. Word of his betrayal spread quickly through the industry's tight-knit community. He eventually took work as a warehouse supervisor, earning a fraction of his former salary. Frances Reynolds kept the house and custody of the children. She never remarried, but found happiness in a simpler life away from the social pressures that had contributed